Hey everyone, welcome back. As usual, we're building in our Minecraft world while I tell you about someone who discovered their partner on a dating show that was filmed just last month. Here's the thing, when betrayal gets caught on camera and broadcast to thousands of viewers, there's really nowhere left to hide. They thought they were being clever, juggling two lives like it was nothing. But the best part, they can't even blame anyone else. This is the kind of story where the truth doesn't just come out. It gets served with a side of humiliation and a timestamp to prove everything. Before we jump in, I just want to pause for a second to say, seriously, thank you to everyone who's been showing up, leaving comments, and supporting the channel. It really means the world to me. I see you, I appreciate you, and honestly, your support keeps this whole thing going. Now, let's get this started. I was having one of those nights where nothing looked good on any streaming service. You know the type, where you scroll for 20 minutes just to end up rewatching something you've seen 100 times. I'd just gotten home from work, my partner was supposedly pulling another late shift at the office, and I was ready to zone out with whatever mindless content I could find. That's when I stumbled across this new dating show I'd never heard of before. The thumbnail looked dramatic enough, so I figured why not. I clicked play and settled into the couch with my takeout. The first few minutes were the usual reality TV nonsense, dramatic music and contestants introducing themselves, with their carefully rehearsed sob stories about why they deserve love. I was half paying attention, mostly just scrolling through my phone, when I heard a laugh that made my entire body go cold. I looked up at the screen, and there he was, my partner of 3 years, sitting on a velvet couch in what looked like some tropical villa, laughing and touching the arm of a woman in a cocktail dress. I actually said, "What the hell," out loud to my empty apartment. I rewound the footage just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Nope, that was definitely him. Same dimple on his left cheek, same stupid expensive watch I'd helped him pick out for his birthday last year. Same everything. He was introducing himself to the camera, talking about how he was ready to find real love and settle down with the right person. The woman next to him giggled and asked if he was always this charming. He gave her the same smile he'd given me on our first date. My hands were shaking as I paused the show and checked the description. It said the season was filmed recently and was being released as episodes dropped. I went to the show's social media pages, looking for any information about filming dates. Their Instagram had behind-the-scenes photos tagged from 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago. I pulled up my calendar just to confirm what I already knew. 6 weeks ago, we were together. 6 weeks ago, he'd told me he loved me. 6 weeks ago, we'd been planning a vacation for next month. I took screenshots of everything. Him on the couch, him on what looked like a romantic beach date with a different contestant, him in the confession booth talking about his connection with someone named Amber. I screenshot the show description, the Instagram posts with dates, everything I could find. Then I kept watching because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Over the next hour, I watched my partner flirt with multiple women, go on elaborate dates, and talk extensively about how single and ready to mingle he was. At one point, he literally said he'd been single for over a year and was tired of the dating scene. We'd been together for 3 years. The math wasn't mathing, as they say. When he finally came home that night around 11, I was still sitting on the couch. He walked in cheerful as ever, asking what I was up to. I just turned the TV toward him. His face went through about 5 different expressions in 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, panic, and then this forced casual smile like he could somehow play this off. He immediately started talking. No, it wasn't what it looked like. Yes, that was him. But I had to understand, they filmed that show over a year ago and just now released it. The production company must have gotten the dates wrong on their posts. It was all a misunderstanding. He'd actually forgotten he'd even been on the show because it was so long ago and before we met. He loves me. He'd never do that to me. I had to believe him. I let him finish his whole speech. Then I asked him to explain the watch, the one I gave him 8 months ago, the one clearly visible on his wrist in multiple shots. He tried to claim it was a different watch that just looked similar, but his voice was already cracking. I told him I had screenshots and I'd already looked into it, but honestly I just wanted to hear what he'd say. He switched tactics, saying, "Okay, fine. Maybe the dates were more recent than he remembered." But nothing actually happened on the show. It was just for fun, basically a free vacation, and he came home to me, didn't he? That's when it really hit me. Not the betrayal itself, but the fact that he genuinely thought this explanation would work. Like I was supposed to just accept that my partner went on a dating show, romanced multiple women on camera, and it was totally fine because it was just for fun. And technically, he came back. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just told him I needed him to be honest with me about the filming dates. He kept insisting it was older footage, that the show must have messed up the timeline for drama. So I told him I'd called the production company earlier that evening, pretending to be a journalist writing a piece about reality dating shows. They'd been very helpful, even gave me quotes about their rapid production to release timeline. Filming wrapped 6 weeks ago. The season was being released in real time as a test for their new quick turnaround model. His face went completely white. He started stammering about how I was checking up on him, how that was a violation of trust, how I should have just talked to him first before going behind his back to investigate. The audacity was genuinely impressive. This man had been on national television declaring himself single, and I'd violated his trust by making a phone call. I asked him point blank if he'd been seeing anyone else, thinking maybe there was more I didn't know about. He swore up and down that nothing physical happened with any of the contestants. They were all just playing it up for cameras, and he never intended for me to find out because it didn't mean anything, which, really makes you feel special. That's when I told him I was done, not asking for an explanation, not interested in couples therapy, just done. He tried to argue, saying I was overreacting, that we could work through this, that everyone makes mistakes. I reminded him this wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. This was a series of calculated decisions that included applying to be on a dating show, going through what I'm sure was an extensive interview process, flying to whatever tropical location they filmed at, and spending weeks actively pursuing other women on camera. He got angry then, saying, fine, if I wanted to throw away 3 years over nothing, that was my problem. He'd sleep on the couch and we'd talk about this rationally in the morning when I'd calmed down. I told him not to bother because I wouldn't be here in the morning. I waited until he left for work the next day. Then I packed everything that mattered to me. Clothes, documents, the few pieces of furniture I'd brought into the relationship. I loaded it all into my car in 3 trips. Then I printed out the most damning screenshots, the ones where he was clearly wearing the watch I'd given him while canoodling with contestants, and I left them spread across the kitchen counter where he'd definitely see them. I didn't leave a note. The screenshot said everything that needed to be said. I blocked his number, blocked him on every social media platform, and stayed with my sister for a few days while I figured out my next move. Within hours, his family started calling. First his mum, very sweet, asking if we could talk about whatever happened because her son was devastated. Then his sister, much less sweet, demanding to know why I'd blindsided her brother and abandoned him without even trying to work things out. I didn't answer any of them. I did, however, send his mother a link to the show with a timestamp of her son's most romantic beach date. She stopped calling. His sister did not. She left me a voicemail calling me every name in the book, saying I was cruel and heartless for humiliating him like this, and that he'd made one mistake, and I was destroying him over it. One mistake. The man had been on a reality dating show for weeks. That's not one mistake. That's a whole season of mistakes, literally. My friends have been incredibly supportive, especially after I showed them the footage. A few of them admitted they'd seen ads for the show but didn't watch it, and now they felt terrible for not giving me a heads up. I told them it wasn't their job to monitor reality TV for my partner's face, but I appreciated the sentiment. The weirdest part is he's apparently telling people I left him out of nowhere with no explanation. His friends have been sliding into my DMs asking what happened, saying he's really broken up about it. I've just been sending them the link to the show and letting them draw their own conclusions. Most have gone silent after that. A few have apologized on his behalf, which is nice, I guess, but doesn't really change anything. I found out from a mutual friend that he's claiming the show edited him to look worse than he was, and that I'm being vindictive by not letting him explain. Explain what exactly? I'm not sure. The footage speaks for itself. He went on a dating show while we were together. There's no director's cut that makes that okay. The thing that really gets me is how easy it would have been for me to never find out. If I'd picked a different show that night, or if I'd been too tired to pay attention, I might have stayed with him indefinitely. He certainly wasn't planning to tell me, and that's somehow worse than the betrayal itself, knowing he was fully prepared to just never mention it and hope I didn't stumble across his season premiere. I'm doing okay now. Better than okay, actually. I got my own apartment, something small but entirely mine. I've been focusing on work, hanging out with friends, basically just rebuilding my life without someone who thought reality TV fame was worth risking our relationship. Sometimes I wonder if he actually won the show. I never finished watching the season. Part of me is curious, but a bigger part of me doesn't want to give him the viewing numbers. Let him have his 15 minutes of fame. I'll take the peace of mind that comes from knowing exactly who someone is before wasting any more time on them. His family finally stopped calling about 2 weeks ago. I'm assuming they watched the show. I heard through the grapevine that his mum was not pleased, which gives me a tiny bit of satisfaction I'm not entirely proud of. His sister apparently told him he was an idiot, which I deeply appreciate, even though we'll probably never speak again. The screenshots are still on my phone. I haven't deleted them, not because I need the reminder, but because sometimes I genuinely can't believe it happened. 3 years together and he risked it all for a chance to be on TV, making out with strangers in a villa. The risk to reward ratio there is honestly baffling. I've started dating again, casually. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and getting to know people. And yes, I do Google them first now to make sure they're not currently filming any reality television shows. Once bitten, twice shy and all that. But if you think a dating show betrayal is bad, wait until you hear what one Redditor discovered when their brother's best friend finally broke his silence at a family dinner. Jake had been part of our family for as long as I could remember. He and my brother met in middle school and became inseparable. The kind of friends who showed up to every holiday dinner, every birthday party, every random Tuesday night just because. By the time I was old enough to really pay attention, Jake was already a fixture. My parents treated him like a second son. My mum always made sure to include him in family photos. Looking back now, that detail makes my skin crawl. It was my parents' 35th wedding anniversary, and we'd planned this whole dinner at their favorite restaurant, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list that requires a second mortgage. My brother and I had split the cost, Jake had tagged along like always, and everything was going exactly how these things usually go. My dad told the same stories he tells at every gathering. My mom laughed at the same spots, and we all pretended the food justified the price tag. Jake had been drinking more than usual, but nobody thought much of it. He was always the fun drunk, the guy who got louder and told worse jokes as the night went on. After dessert, while my parents were saying goodbye to some friends they'd run into, Jake grabbed my arm and asked if we could talk outside for a minute. I figured he wanted to complain about his job or ask advice about some girl he was seeing. Normal best friend sibling stuff. We got out to the parking lot and he was pacing, running his hands through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. I asked if he was okay and he just laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Then he said he needed to tell me something, that he'd been carrying it for too long and it was eating him alive. I made some joke about him joining a cult or something, trying to lighten whatever mood this was. That's when he told me he'd been in love with my mum since he was 17. Just said it straight out, like he was commenting on the weather. I actually laughed because what else do you do when your brother's best friend says something that insane? But he wasn't laughing. He looked dead serious, and that's when my stomach started to sink. Then he said they'd had an affair when I was 10 years old. He said it lasted 2 years. He said he thinks about it all the time and he can't keep pretending it never happened. I told him to stop talking, that he was drunk and saying things he'd regret. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos of old letters, handwritten notes from my mum talking about meeting up, about keeping things secret, about how much she cared about him. The dates were clearly visible. I recognized my mum's handwriting immediately, the way she loops her L's, the little hearts she draws instead of dots over her eyes. I felt like I was going to throw up right there in the parking lot. This man had been sitting at our dinner table for 15 years, eating my mum's cooking, accepting Christmas gifts from my dad, all while carrying this secret. The sheer audacity of showing up to their anniversary dinner after sleeping with my mum when he was barely legal was genuinely staggering. I asked him why he was telling me this now, what he possibly thought would come from this confession. He said he needed someone to know, that the guilt was destroying him, and he thought I'd understand because we'd always gotten along. Like our casual friendly relationship somehow made me the appropriate person to dump this nuclear bomb on. I left him in the parking lot and went back inside in a daze. My parents were getting ready to leave, talking about what a nice night it had been. My brother was checking his phone, completely oblivious. I felt like I was watching everything through a fog, like none of it was real. I waited 2 days before I confronted my mum. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just kept replaying Jake's words and looking at those letter photos I'd screenshotted before I could stop myself. Finally, I went to her house when I knew my dad would be at work. I showed her the screenshots and asked her point blank if it was true. She went completely pale. For a solid minute, she just stared at the phone screen, and I could see her trying to figure out how to spin this, how to explain it away. Then she just crumbled, started crying, saying she was so sorry, that it was the biggest mistake of her life, that she'd ended it years ago and had been trying to forget it ever happened. I asked her how it even started. She said Jake had confessed feelings for her when he was 17, that she'd tried to shut it down, but he was persistent and she was going through a rough patch with my dad, and it just happened. It just happened. Like an affair with your son's teenage best friend is something that accidentally occurs, like a fender bender or spilling coffee. She begged me not to tell my dad, said it would destroy him, that it was ancient history, and bringing it up now would only cause pain for no reason. She actually used the phrase, "what he doesn't know won't hurt him," which is rich considering it clearly hurt me, and I'd only known for 2 days. I told her I needed time to process and left. I drove around for hours, just trying to wrap my head around the fact that my entire childhood had this massive lie sitting underneath it. Every family dinner with Jake, every time my mom welcomed him into our home, my dad had no idea what had happened. The betrayal wasn't just the affair itself, it was the years of deception, the casual way they'd both acted like nothing had happened. I decided to tell my brother first. He was my closest family member after my parents, and I thought we'd figure out together how to handle this. I thought he'd be as horrified as I was. That was a miscalculation. I met him at his apartment and explained everything. Showed him the screenshots, told him about Jake's confession, about Mom's admission. I expected shock, anger, maybe denial. Instead, he got very quiet. And then he asked why I couldn't just leave it alone. I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. I asked him to repeat that and he did, slower this time, like I was the one not understanding. He said it happened 15 years ago, that Mom clearly regretted it, and dragging it all up now would only destroy our family for no reason. I pointed out that our family was already destroyed. We just didn't know it yet. That's when he snapped, started yelling about how I always had to make everything dramatic, how I couldn't just let things be, how I was going to ruin our parents' marriage over something that didn't even involve me. He said I was being selfish, that I should think about Dad's happiness instead of my need to be right. The mental gymnastics required to blame me for this were honestly Olympic level. I wasn't the one who had the affair. I wasn't the one who confessed it at an anniversary dinner. I was just the person who now had to carry this information, and apparently that made me the villain. But that wasn't even the worst part. My brother called Jake immediately after I left, warning him that I knew and was planning to tell Dad. Jake panicked and called my mum. My mum panicked and confessed everything to my dad before I even had a chance to figure out what to do. My dad called me at 11 at night, completely broken, asked me if I'd known, how long I'd known, why I hadn't told him immediately. I tried to explain that I'd only found out a few days ago and was trying to process it, but he just kept asking why I'd kept it from him. Like the few days I'd sat with this information was somehow equivalent to my mum's 15 years of lies. My parents are getting divorced. Dad moved out last week and isn't speaking to Mum at all. They're selling the house. 35 years of marriage, gone. My brother isn't speaking to me. He's told extended family that I destroyed our parents' marriage by digging up old history that should have stayed buried. Some of them believe him. I've gotten texts from aunts and uncles asking why I couldn't just let the past be the past, telling me that families keep secrets for a reason. And Jake. Jake sent me an email 3 days ago apologizing for putting me in this position. Said he'd been carrying the guilt for so long that he just had to get it off his chest, and he was sorry I got caught in the fallout. He actually wrote that he hoped we could still be friends someday, like we just had a minor disagreement over where to get lunch. The level of delusion required to think we'd ever be friends after this was genuinely fascinating. This man imploded my entire family because he couldn't handle his own guilt, and he thought a casual apology email would smooth things over. I'm staying with a friend right now because being around any of my family feels impossible. My dad keeps calling, wanting to rehash details I don't have. My mum sent flowers with a card asking for forgiveness. My brother sent one text saying I should be ashamed of myself for destroying everyone's lives. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Seriously, I need to know I'm not alone in this madness. Now back to the wreckage. The thing that keeps me up at night is that I'm somehow the villain in this story, not Jake, who started an affair with his best friend's mum when he was 17 and she was in her 40s, not my mum, who betrayed my dad and her family for 2 years, not my brother, who values keeping up appearances over actual honesty. Me. Because I didn't enthusiastically participate in covering up a 15-year-old secret that I'd only known about for a few days. I've been replaying every family memory with Jake in it, and they're all tainted now. Every holiday, every dinner, every casual conversation. Was my mom thinking about the affair? Was Jake? How did they look my dad in the eye knowing what they'd done? My dad asked me if I thought he'd been a bad husband, if that's why it happened. That conversation destroyed me. I had to tell my father that his wife's affair had nothing to do with him and everything to do with her choices, but I could see in his eyes he didn't believe me. He's questioning their entire marriage now, wondering what else he missed, what other secrets are waiting to surface. I looked up the legal definition of grooming because Jake was 17 when it started, technically a minor depending on the state. My mum was 42. The power dynamic there is horrifying when you really think about it, but everyone's so focused on keeping the secret that nobody wants to address how inappropriate the entire situation was from the start. Jake's been texting my brother, apparently. They're still friends. My brother told me this like it was supposed to make me feel guilty for causing drama. His best friend had an affair with our mom, and he's more concerned about maintaining that friendship than supporting our dad. The priority system there is genuinely broken. I've started therapy because processing this alone was making me feel insane. My therapist keeps using the phrase misplaced blame, talking about how families often scapegoat the person who reveals dysfunction rather than addressing the actual dysfunction. It's validating, but doesn't make family dinners any less awkward. Not that we're having those anymore. The divorce is getting messy. My dad wants to know exact dates, details, anything he can use. My mum's lawyer is arguing that bringing up a 15-year-old affair is irrelevant to current asset division. My brother thinks they should just split everything 50-50 and move on. I think they should all stop asking me to take sides. Some of my friends have been supportive, but others have said maybe my brother had a point about letting sleeping dogs lie. Those friendships are pretty much done. I can't be close with people who think covering up major betrayals is the right move just because time has passed. The worst part is Jake keeps trying to reach out, sends messages saying he never meant for any of this to happen, that he thought telling me would help somehow. Like confessing to destroying my family at their anniversary dinner was some kind of therapeutic breakthrough for him. The self-centeredness is almost impressive. My mum's been telling people that Jake manipulated her, that she was vulnerable and he took advantage. My brother's been telling people I overreacted to ancient history. Jake's been telling people he was young and made mistakes. Everyone's rewriting history to make themselves look better, and I'm just sitting here with the actual truth nobody wants to hear. I don't regret telling my dad. He deserved to know. But I do regret thinking my family would handle this with any kind of maturity or honesty. They're all so invested in their own narratives that the actual facts don't even matter anymore. So now I'm the person who destroyed a 35-year marriage by not keeping a secret I'd known about for less than a week. I'm the villain for expecting my family to deal with their own dysfunction honestly. And somewhere, Jake is probably sleeping fine at night, having successfully transferred his guilt onto everyone else. Family secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. And speaking of unexpected discoveries, one woman's routine jewelry cleaning led to a question that still haunts her. I was doing one of those deep cleaning projects you put off for way too long, the kind where you find things you forgot you owned buried under years of accumulated junk. Our garage had become a graveyard for half-finished projects and boxes we never unpacked after moving in. My late husband used to joke that the garage was where things went to die, which feels grimly appropriate now. I was sorting through a box of old tools trying to decide what to donate and what to keep when I saw it. A flash of gold at the bottom of the box, tucked under some rusty screwdrivers and a tape measure that didn't retract anymore. I reached in and pulled out a ring, and the second it was in my hand, I knew exactly what it was. My husband's wedding ring, the one he'd worn every single day of our marriage, the one with our initials engraved on the inside and a tiny scratch on the band from when he'd caught it on a fence post helping our neighbor. The one I'd specifically, explicitly requested he be buried wearing 2 years ago. I just stood there in the garage holding it, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. This wasn't possible. I'd been at the funeral home when they prepared him. I'd seen the ring on his finger. I'd touched his hand one last time and felt the band there, cold metal against cold skin. They'd closed the casket with him wearing it. I knew they had, except apparently they hadn't, because I was holding the real ring in my garage, surrounded by paint cans and garden tools. I called the funeral home immediately, barely able to get the words out. The woman who answered was very calm, very professional, asking me to explain the situation slowly. I told her I'd found my husband's wedding ring and he was supposed to be buried with it. She put me on hold, came back a few minutes later, and confirmed that according to their records, yes, he was buried wearing his wedding ring. I told her that was impossible because I was literally holding his ring in my hand right now. She got very quiet, then asked if I was certain it was the same ring. I read her the inscription, our initials, our wedding date, engraved exactly how I'd requested when we got married. She said she'd need to call me back and hung up. I sat in the garage for probably an hour just staring at the ring, trying to make sense of it. Had they made a mistake? Had someone removed it before the burial and forgotten to tell me? But why would it be in our garage, in a random box of tools? My husband had been wearing it the day he died. The hospital had given me his personal effects, and the ring hadn't been in that bag because I'd asked them specifically to leave it on him for the funeral. The funeral home called back and very carefully explained that my husband had been buried with a wedding ring. They had photos from the preparation process if I wanted to see them. I said yes, send them. The photos came through on email, and there he was, dressed in the suit I'd picked out, hands folded, wearing what looked like his wedding ring. But I had his wedding ring in my hand. I took it to a jeweler the next day to confirm it was authentic, that I wasn't losing my mind. They examined it, confirmed it was real gold, confirmed the inscription matched what I'd described, even found records of the original purchase from the jewelry store, where we'd bought our rings 15 years ago. This was definitely my husband's ring. No question. That's when I called a lawyer because something was very, very wrong, and I needed someone who could help me figure out what. My lawyer contacted the funeral home with a formal request for information. They stonewalled initially, citing privacy policies and internal procedures. My lawyer filed for an exhumation order. The funeral home suddenly became very cooperative. The director called me personally, stammering through an apology that didn't make sense yet. He said there had been an incident with one of their employees, that they were conducting an internal investigation, that they wanted to make this right. I demanded to know what kind of incident results in a dead person being buried with someone else's jewelry. He wouldn't give me details over the phone, asked if I could come to the funeral home to discuss it in person. I brought my lawyer. Turns out the funeral director's son, who'd been working there for 6 years, had been systematically stealing jewelry from bodies and replacing them with cheap duplicates before burial. Wedding rings, necklaces, anything valuable that families wanted buried with their loved ones. He'd swap them out for fakes, pocket the real ones, and apparently nobody had noticed until now. The director showed us the fake ring they'd buried with my husband. Looked identical from a distance, but up close you could tell it was cheap metal with a badly done engraving. Cost maybe $20 online. My husband's real ring was 14-karat gold, worth several thousand just for the metal, not counting the sentimental value. I asked how long this had been going on. The director said they were still investigating, but it looked like at least 4 years, possibly longer. They'd found a storage unit rented under the son's name filled with jewelry. Some of it already sold, some waiting to be pawned. Dozens of pieces, rings, watches, necklaces, bracelets, all stolen from dead people whose families trusted them to treat their loved ones with dignity. The son had been arrested. The funeral home was now under investigation by the state licensing board, and I wasn't the only family affected. Once word got out, other families started coming forward, wanting to know if their loved ones had been robbed too. The funeral home had to cross-reference records with the storage unit inventory, contacting families to let them know their mother's pearl necklace or their father's class ring had been stolen and replaced with a fake. They offered to pay for the exhumation so I could verify nothing else had been taken or disturbed, but honestly, I couldn't face it. The thought of opening that casket, seeing him again after 2 years, just to confirm some entitled mortician's son hadn't stolen his watch or his cufflinks, I just couldn't do it. I have his ring back. That's what mattered most to me. But here's where it gets absurd. The funeral home's insurance company tried to argue that since I had the ring back, there were no damages. Like the emotional trauma of thinking your husband was buried with his wedding ring, only to find out he was actually buried with a $20 fake, while some stranger pawned the real one. That's not worth anything, apparently. My lawyer filed a lawsuit anyway. So did about 15 other families. Last I heard, the funeral home is facing over $2 million in claims, their license is suspended pending investigation, and the son is looking at felony theft charges. Multiple counts. I got contacted by a reporter doing a story on funeral home fraud. Apparently this happens more often than people think. Families rarely verify what's actually in the casket versus what they requested. Who would? You trust these people during the worst moment of your life. You assume they have basic human decency. Finding out that trust was violated, that someone saw your grief as an opportunity for profit, it does something to you. I've been wearing my husband's ring on a chain around my neck. Can't bring myself to put it away again. I keep thinking about how it ended up in that box of tools. Best guess is the son stashed it there temporarily, maybe during the service when he had access to our house for some reason, planning to come back for it later. Then forgot about it, or couldn't get back in, or got nervous. Just left it there like it was nothing. The funeral director keeps calling to apologize, offering refunds and free services and anything else he can think of. I don't answer. What's he going to say that makes this better? Sorry my son robbed your husband's corpse. Here's a discount on your next funeral. The absurdity would be funny if it wasn't so horrifying. Other families aren't getting their jewelry back. Most of it was sold years ago. Impossible to track down now. Some woman's engagement ring that her husband wanted buried with her. Gone. Sold to a pawn shop for a fraction of its worth. A man's military medals that his kids specifically wanted him to have. Melted down for scrap metal probably. I finally have his real ring back, and I should feel relieved, but I can't stop thinking about what else they might have taken from him. Did they take his watch? His cufflinks? I dressed him in his favorite tie, put his father's compass in his pocket. Is any of that actually with him, or did it all get stolen too? The funeral home won't tell me without an exhumation, and I can't face that. So I just don't know. I have the ring, and I'm grateful for that, but there's this gap now where certainty used to be. I thought I knew exactly how my husband was laid to rest. Now I don't know anything for sure. The trial starts next month. My lawyer says it's a slam dunk case, but that doesn't make me feel better. No amount of money brings back the peace of mind I had before I found that ring in the garage. I used to think about him resting peacefully, wearing his ring like he wore it in life. Now I think about some stranger pawning his belongings while he lay there with cheap fakes. People keep asking if I'm going to have the ring reburied with him eventually, maybe during a second service. I don't know. Part of me wants him to have it, but part of me can't trust any funeral home ever again. So for now it stays with me, around my neck, where I know exactly where it is. Sometimes the truth about our loved ones emerges from the strangest places, but nothing prepared this next person for what they found hidden in their girlfriend's closet. My girlfriend had asked me to grab her phone charger from her closet while she was in the shower. Simple favor, nothing weird about it. I'd been to her apartment hundreds of times over the past 2 years, grabbed things from her closet before, completely normal couple behavior. I was digging through the usual mess of shoes and bags when I accidentally knocked over this decorative wooden box on the top shelf. It hit the ground and the lid popped off, spilling photos everywhere. I started gathering them up, not really paying attention at first, just trying to get everything back in the box before she got out of the shower. Then I actually looked at one of the photos and my brain just stopped working. It was my girlfriend. At some fancy restaurant, candlelight wine glasses, dressed up nice, sitting across from my father. Not like a group dinner photo, not a casual run-in somewhere. A date. They were holding hands across the table. I grabbed another photo, them at a beach I recognized from my dad's business trip last year. Another one, them in what was clearly a hotel room, his arm around her waist. I kept finding more, dozens of them. Different locations, different outfits, different occasions. And on the back of each one, she'd written the date in her neat handwriting. The earliest was from 3 years ago. The most recent was from 6 months ago. We'd been together for 2 years. The math was doing terrible things in my head. I heard the shower turn off, and I just sat there on her closet floor, surrounded by evidence that my girlfriend and my father had some kind of relationship I knew nothing about. She came out wrapped in a towel, saw me sitting there with the photos, and her face went completely white. I asked her what these were. My voice sounded weird, distant, like someone else was talking. She started stammering about how it wasn't what it looked like, that she could explain. I held up the beach photo, the one from my dad's business trip, and asked her to explain that one specifically. She sat down on the bed and started talking fast. Said they were just friends, that my dad had been mentoring her for her career before we even met, that the photos were from professional dinners and networking events. I pointed out that professional dinners don't usually involve holding hands and hotel rooms. She said I was misunderstanding the context. I grabbed the photo dated from 6 months ago. We'd been together for a year and a half at that point. I asked what kind of mentoring required secret beach trips while she was supposedly visiting her sister. She started crying, saying it wasn't like that. They'd stopped anything romantic before we got serious. They were just maintaining a friendship. Anything romantic. She'd just admitted there was something romantic to stop. I left her apartment with a handful of the photos and drove straight to my parents' house. It was almost midnight, but I didn't care. My mom answered the door confused, asking if everything was okay. I asked where Dad was. He came downstairs in his robe, saw my face, and I watched him realize I knew something. I showed them both the photos. My mum's expression went from confused to horrified in about 3 seconds. My dad tried the same explanation my girlfriend had used, that they were just friends, that he'd been helping her with career advice. My mom asked him point blank if he'd been having an affair. The silence that followed answered the question. Then he started talking, and somehow his version was even worse than I'd imagined. He said he'd met my girlfriend at a work conference 3 years ago. They'd dated casually for a few months, nothing serious. Then she'd mentioned she was seeing someone new, and they'd agreed to just be friends. He claimed he had no idea the someone new was me until we'd been together for almost 6 months. I asked him when he figured it out. He said at my birthday dinner last year, when I'd brought her to meet the family for the first time. He'd recognized her immediately, but she'd played it cool, acted like they were meeting for the first time. He'd gone along with it because he didn't want to embarrass her or complicate things. My mum asked why he didn't tell anyone after that dinner. He said he didn't want to upset me, that their relationship was in the past anyway, so it didn't matter. Except the photos I had went up to 6 months ago, almost a year after that birthday dinner. I showed him those photos, asked him to explain how their relationship was in the past, when they were still going on trips together while he was supposedly on business and she was supposedly visiting family. He tried to claim they'd maintained a friendship, that it was all innocent by that point. My mother told him to get out of the house, just completely calm, told him to pack a bag and leave. He tried to argue, she repeated herself louder. He left. I went back to my girlfriend's apartment. She'd been calling and texting non-stop, saying we needed to talk, that I was overreacting, that nothing physical had happened after we got together. I told her I didn't believe her, and even if that were true, she'd been maintaining some kind of emotional relationship with my father behind my back for our entire relationship. The lying alone was enough. She tried the friend angle again, insisting that yes, maybe she should have told me they knew each other, but they'd agreed it would just make things awkward. I asked if she thought finding out this way was less awkward. She didn't have an answer for that. Then came the breaking point. She actually had the nerve to say I was being unfair, that I was judging her for a relationship that happened before we met, that my dad had been important to her career development, and I was trying to take that away from her. Like the issue was me being controlling, and not her secretly staying connected to my father while dating me. I told her we were done. She started crying harder, saying I was throwing away 2 years over a misunderstanding. I said 2 years of lies wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. I took my stuff and left. My mum called the next day to tell me she'd filed for divorce. She'd gone through my dad's phone while he was packing and found messages between him and my girlfriend from just 2 weeks ago. Nothing explicitly romantic, but familiar enough that it was clear they'd been talking regularly. He'd been giving her advice on how to handle me when I got stressed about work, what gifts I'd like for our anniversary, relationship coaching from the man who'd dated her first. The violation of that felt worse somehow than the physical betrayal. He'd been in the background of my relationship the whole time, helping her manage me like I was a project, and she'd been using information from him to be a better girlfriend, which made every sweet gesture feel fake in retrospect. My siblings found out when my mum told them about the divorce. They called me asking what happened. I told them the truth, sent them some of the photos. My older sister was horrified. My younger brother somehow found a way to blame me for snooping in my girlfriend's closet. Said if I'd just minded my business, none of this would have come out and everyone would still be happy. Happy. Like living in a lie where my girlfriend was secretly maintaining a relationship with my father was happiness. The cognitive dissonance required to blame me for discovering the affair rather than blaming the people having it was genuinely mind-boggling. My sister agreed with him, though, said I should have talked to my girlfriend privately instead of going to mum and dad, that I'd destroyed the family by exposing it. I pointed out I didn't destroy anything. Dad did that when he started dating my future girlfriend, and then continued doing it when he maintained contact with her throughout our relationship. They're convinced I overreacted, that a brief relationship 3 years ago shouldn't matter, that the friendship after was innocent, and I ruined multiple relationships by being jealous and insecure. My mum's the only one who seems to understand that the timeline and the secrecy make this irredeemably wrong. My dad's been staying with my brother, who's apparently decided to support him through this difficult time. They've been sending me articles about forgiveness and moving past betrayal. The irony of my father's affair partner sending me advice on how to forgive him is not lost on me. My ex-girlfriend has been texting mutual friends, telling them I broke up with her over her having a male friend, that I was jealous and controlling. She's conveniently leaving out that the male friend is my father, and they'd dated before. Some of our friends have actually taken her side, saying I should be more secure in our relationship. I've stopped trying to explain it. If people can hear that story and think I'm the problem, those aren't people I need in my life anyway. I've got my mom and my sister on my side, even if my sister thinks I could have handled it more quietly. My dad sent me a long email about how he never meant to hurt me, how the situation just evolved in a complicated way, and he'd understand if I needed time, but hoped we could eventually repair our relationship. He signed it Love Dad, like we were having a minor disagreement about borrowed tools or something. The entitlement to my forgiveness after what he did is almost impressive. He dated my girlfriend before I did, maintained secret contact with her throughout our relationship, gave her insider information on how to manage me, and now he expects me to eventually come around because he's my father, and that trumps everything apparently. I'm not going to. Some things you don't come back from, and this is one of them. I'm done with both of them. My mum's divorce is moving forward. I've blocked my ex on everything, and I'm trying to figure out how to rebuild a life where I can trust people again after finding out the two people I trusted most were lying to my face for 2 years. Betrayal from a partner is one thing, but when it involves your own parent, that's a whole new level. Though this next story proves that sometimes mothers-in-law can accidentally become your greatest ally. I was having a perfectly normal Tuesday morning when my phone buzzed with a text from my future mother-in-law. We'd gotten closer over the past year while planning the wedding, and she'd been sweet about sending me little updates and photos of my fiancé when he was younger. So when I saw her name pop up with, "Look how sweet my boy is," I smiled and opened the message expecting some embarrassing childhood photo or a cute text about our upcoming wedding. Instead, I got a screenshot of a text conversation between my fiancé and someone named Claire. The messages were time-stamped from the night before. "Can't wait to see you tonight" from him. "Miss you already" from her. And then the one that made my stomach drop. "She has no idea we're good." I stared at my phone for a solid minute, reading and rereading those messages, trying to make them mean something other than what they obviously meant. Maybe Claire was a wedding planner we'd hired that I'd forgotten about. Maybe this was some kind of surprise he was planning. Maybe I was having a stroke and hallucinating the whole thing. I called my future mother-in-law immediately. She answered cheerful and bright, asking if I'd gotten her message. I said yes, I got it, and I needed her to explain who Claire was. The silence on the other end of the line lasted way too long. Then she said, "Oh no," in this small, horrified voice that told me everything I needed to know. She started apologizing, talking fast, saying she'd meant to send me a different screenshot, one where he was talking about how excited he was for the wedding. She'd gotten confused and sent the wrong one. I asked again, slower this time, who Claire was. She went quiet again, then said, his co-worker. The way she said it with that pause before co-worker, like she was testing out whether that explanation would work, made my hands start shaking. I told her I needed her to forward me the entire conversation. She tried to say that wasn't necessary, that it was probably just friendly workplace banter, that I shouldn't jump to conclusions. I told her if she didn't forward it to me right now, I was driving to her house and we were going to look at it together. The screenshots started coming through, dozens of them, messages going back 8 months. 8 months. We'd been engaged for 10 months. I'd been planning our wedding, tasting cakes, addressing invitations, while my fiancé was texting another woman things like, counting down the hours until I can hold you again, and last night was incredible. But that wasn't even the worst part. Mixed in with the romantic messages were texts between my fiancé and his mother. Him telling her he was confused, that he had feelings for Claire but didn't want to hurt me. Her responding that he needed to figure out what he wanted before the wedding. Him saying he would, he just needed more time. Her saying she wouldn't tell me, but he needed to do the right thing soon. My future mother-in-law had known for 8 months that her son was cheating on me. She'd helped me pick out centerpieces knowing her son was sleeping with someone else. She'd gone dress shopping with me while keeping his secret. The betrayal from her somehow felt worse than his in that moment. I asked her why she didn't tell me. She started crying, saying she thought he'd end it and do the right thing, that she didn't want to break my heart if it was just a phase. A phase, like cheating on your fiancé for 8 months, is comparable to a teenage boy dyeing his hair black. I told her to tell me everything she knew about Claire. She said Claire worked in his department, they'd gotten close on a project, and it had developed into something more. She didn't know all the details because she'd tried to stay out of it, hoping he'd come to his senses. I pointed out that staying out of it while watching me plan a wedding to her son was actually the opposite of staying out of it. It was active participation in the lie. She didn't have a good response to that, just kept apologizing, saying she'd made a terrible mistake, that she should have told me, but she kept thinking he'd tell me himself. I hung up on her. I called my fiancé next. He was at work, answered distracted, asking if everything was okay. I asked him who Claire was. The silence was immediate and total. Then he asked where I'd heard that name. I told him his mother had accidentally sent me their text messages. More silence. Then he said he could explain. I told him not to bother. I'd read the explanations in his text to his mum. He started talking anyway, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that he and Claire were just friends, and the text sounded worse out of context. I read him back his own message from 3 days ago about how amazing she looked in the dress she'd worn to dinner. He stopped talking. Then he switched tactics, said, okay, yes. He'd gotten close to Claire, but nothing physical had happened. I asked if he thought I was stupid. He insisted it was just emotional, that they'd never actually crossed that line. I read him the message where he thanked her for last night, and she responded with a winky face. He said that could mean anything. The audacity to lie when I literally had screenshots of everything was almost funny. Almost. I told him the wedding was off and hung up. He called back immediately. I didn't answer. He called 17 more times. I blocked him. Then I opened our wedding planning group chat. It had both families, the wedding party, close friends, about 30 people total. I posted the screenshots, all of them. The text to Claire, the text to his mum, everything. Added a message that said the wedding was cancelled due to the groom's 8-month affair that his mother helped him hide. Then I left the group chat. My phone exploded, people calling, texting, trying to figure out what was happening. My bridesmaids showed up at my apartment within an hour, ready to key his car or slash his tires or whatever I needed. His family was less supportive. His father called, saying I'd humiliated them by posting private messages publicly. I told him his son had humiliated himself by cheating. I just made sure people knew why the wedding was off. Cancelling everything was a nightmare. The venue said no refunds this close to the date. The caterer said the same thing. We'd put down deposits on everything, thousands of dollars, all non-refundable according to the contracts. My fiancé had the nerve to text from a new number, saying I was being vindictive by cancelling, without discussing it with him first, that we could have worked through this. Worked through what exactly? Him sleeping with Claire for 8 months while planning our wedding. Him telling his mother he was confused while picking out wedding bands with me. The sheer disconnect from reality was staggering. That's when his mother called again. She was crying, saying she knew I'd never forgive her, but she wanted to help make this right. She said she'd testify on my behalf if I wanted to sue to get the deposits back, that she'd admit she knew about the affair, and the wedding shouldn't have been planned in the first place. I asked why she'd do that. She said because it was the right thing to do, even if it was 8 months too late. I consulted with a lawyer who said we could potentially argue fraud, that the deposits were paid under false pretenses since my fiancé was actively cheating at the time. Having his mother's testimony would help. She came to the lawyer's office and gave a formal statement about everything she knew, when she knew it, the conversations with her son. She looked miserable the whole time, but she did it. We sent demand letters to every vendor with her statement attached. Most of them refunded the deposits rather than deal with a lawsuit. The venue tried to fight it but backed down when my lawyer sent them screenshots of my fiancé, texting Claire about meeting up on the same days he'd told me he was working late to pay for wedding expenses. My ex-fiancé has been telling people I destroyed his relationship with his mother over a misunderstanding. His mother, to her credit, has been telling anyone who asks that there was no misunderstanding. Her son cheated, and she helped him hide it. She sent me a long apology letter taking full responsibility for her part in it, saying she'd been a coward and failed me. I don't know if I'll ever forgive her, but I appreciate her willingness to make it right in the only way she could. She's been ostracized by half her family for testifying against her son. His father isn't speaking to her. She told me it's worth it if it helps me get justice. Things went from bad to unhinged when my ex showed up at my apartment with Claire, of all people, wanting to clear the air. Claire apparently thought I should know that they're in love and didn't mean to hurt me. The entitlement to show up with his affair partner and expect me to listen politely while they explained their feelings was genuinely unbelievable. I told them both to leave or I'd call the police for trespassing. Claire tried to say I was being dramatic, that we were all adults and could handle this maturely. I asked if mature adults have 8-month affairs while planning weddings. She said love is complicated. I closed the door in their faces. They're apparently still together. Someone sent me their social media photos, them on vacation looking happy. Good for them, honestly. They deserve each other. Two people willing to build a relationship on lies and betrayal are perfect together. I got almost all of our deposit money back thanks to his mother's testimony. I've blocked everyone associated with him except his mum, who still texts occasionally asking how I'm doing. I keep her unblocked mostly because her accidental screenshot saved me from marrying someone who was actively cheating. If she'd sent the right screenshot that day, I might have gone through with the wedding completely unaware. So, in a twisted way, her mistake was the best thing that could have happened. Better to find out before the wedding than after. Better to lose deposits than years of my life. And better to know exactly who someone is, thanks to their own mother's evidence, than to keep believing a lie. When even your partner's own family can't defend their actions, you know it's bad. But the next Redditor discovered their boyfriend's work wife had taken things to an entirely different level of inappropriate. I was sorting through the mail like I did every day, mostly junk and bills, when I came across a card with my name on it. Not our names, just mine. The envelope was pale pink with my name and address written in perfect cursive, the kind of handwriting that takes actual effort. I figured it was from one of my friends, or maybe a thank you card from my cousin's wedding last month. I opened it standing right there by the mailbox. Inside was a simple card with flowers on the front, and when I opened it there was a handwritten message. Thank you for sharing him. Our Tuesdays mean everything. Jenna. I read it 3 times before my brain caught up with what I was seeing. Thank you for sharing him. Our Tuesdays. I didn't know anyone named Jenna. I definitely hadn't agreed to share my boyfriend with anyone. And Tuesdays, specifically Tuesdays, my boyfriend had been working late every single Tuesday for the past 6 months. I stood there in the hallway of our apartment building holding this card, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. Some woman named Jenna was thanking me for sharing my boyfriend, and she was confident enough about whatever was happening to send a card to our home address. The boldness of that was almost impressive in a horrifying way. I went inside and immediately checked our calendar. Every Tuesday for 6 months he'd written late meeting or client dinner or some variation of work obligation. I'd never questioned it because he worked in sales and irregular hours weren't unusual. Except now I was questioning everything. When he got home that evening, I was sitting on the couch with the card on the coffee table. He came in cheerful, asking what was for dinner, and I just pointed at the card. He picked it up, read it, and I watched his face go through several expressions before landing on confused concern. He asked who Jenna was, like he didn't know, like some random woman had sent me a card about him without his knowledge. I told him that was exactly what I wanted to know. He said he had no idea, maybe it was a prank or someone from work being inappropriate. I asked if he worked late every Tuesday with someone named Jenna. He paused just long enough for me to know he was calculating his answer. Then he admitted, okay, yes, Jenna was a coworker, and yes, they sometimes grabbed dinner after late meetings on Tuesdays, but it was completely professional. Just networking, building work relationships, nothing weird about it. I asked why he'd never mentioned her name in 6 months of Tuesday dinners. He said it never came up, he didn't think it was relevant. A woman sending thank you cards to your girlfriend for sharing you seems pretty relevant, but okay. He kept insisting it was nothing, that Jenna was probably just socially awkward and didn't realize how the card would come across, that she probably meant thank you for being understanding about his work schedule. I asked if his other coworkers sent me cards thanking me for his work schedule. He didn't have an answer for that. I told him I wanted to call her and clear this up. He immediately said that wasn't necessary, that he'd talk to her at work and straighten out the misunderstanding, which just made me more suspicious. If it was really nothing, why couldn't I call her? The next day was Tuesday. He got ready for work like normal, and I asked what time his meeting with Jenna was. He said there was no meeting. He was working from home today. Convenient. I told him that was fine, but I still wanted to talk to Jenna and understand what the card meant. He got defensive, saying I was being paranoid, that I should trust him. Trust him. The man who'd been having weekly dinners with a woman who sent thank you cards to his girlfriend without ever mentioning her name. Sure. That evening, while he was in the shower, I went through his phone. I know, invasion of privacy, but the card had already invaded my peace of mind, so we were even. I found Jenna in his contacts and called her. She answered with, "Hey babe," in this comfortable, familiar tone that made my stomach turn. I stayed calm, introduced myself as his girlfriend, and asked about the thank you card she'd sent me. The silence on the other end was loud. Then she said in a much smaller voice, "I thought you had an arrangement." An arrangement. I asked her to explain what arrangement she thought we had. She said my boyfriend had told her we were in an open relationship, that Tuesdays were his night to see other people, that I was completely aware and okay with it. She'd sent the card because she thought it was polite to acknowledge the primary partner in an open relationship dynamic. The level of manipulation required to tell your affair partner that your girlfriend knows and approves was genuinely staggering. He hadn't just cheated, he'd created an entire fake relationship structure to make his cheating seem ethical. I thanked Jenna for her honesty and ended the call. Then I started recording on my phone and called her back on speaker. Asked her to repeat what she'd just told me about our supposed arrangement. She did, sounding confused but cooperative. I got it all on recording. Her explaining how my boyfriend had described our open relationship, how Tuesday was his night, how she thought everything was consensual and above board. My boyfriend got out of the shower and came into the bedroom. I played him the recording. Watched his face go pale as Jenna's voice filled the room, explaining the open relationship he'd invented. He started talking immediately, saying Jenna was lying. She was obsessed with him. She'd been pursuing him for months, and he'd been trying to let her down gently. I pointed out that Jenna seemed genuinely shocked to learn we weren't in an open relationship, that her story was pretty detailed and specific for someone who was supposedly delusional. He switched tactics, saying okay, maybe he'd said some things that Jenna misinterpreted, but he'd never actually slept with her. They'd just had dinners. I asked if he really expected me to believe that after hearing that recording. He said I was taking Jenna's word over his, that after years together I should trust him more than some random coworker. I said after years together, he shouldn't have been telling random coworkers we were in an open relationship. He didn't have a response to that. Just kept insisting nothing physical had happened, that it was all a misunderstanding, that Jenna had read too much into friendly conversation. The gaslighting attempt was almost admirable in its shamelessness. I told him to leave. He refused, saying this was his apartment too, we needed to work through this. I packed a bag and went to my friend's place instead. Spent the night trying to figure out my next move, while he sent increasingly desperate texts about how we could fix this. The next morning, I contacted his company's HR department, sent them screenshots of the card, the recording of Jenna admitting to their Tuesday arrangement, and a formal complaint about an inappropriate workplace relationship. His company had strict policies about relationships between coworkers, especially ones that involved lying to partners about the nature of the relationship. HR called me back within 2 hours, said they were launching an investigation and thanked me for bringing it to their attention. Within a week, both my boyfriend and Jenna were fired for violating company policy. Turned out they'd been using company resources for their Tuesday dinners, charging them as client entertainment when there were no clients involved. The fake receipts they'd submitted were actually fraud. My boyfriend showed up at my friend's apartment absolutely furious, said I'd ruined his career over a misunderstanding, that getting him fired was vindictive and cruel. I asked if having an affair with a coworker while lying to both her and me about our relationship status qualified as a misunderstanding. He said I was being dramatic, that they'd just had dinner a few times. Dinner every Tuesday for 6 months, with enough intimacy that she felt comfortable sending me thank you cards and answering his calls with, "Hey babe," but sure, just dinner. The mental gymnastics were exhausting. He tried to claim he could sue me for getting him fired, that I'd interfered with his employment. I pointed out that he'd interfered with his own employment by committing fraud with company resources. He left threatening to tell everyone I'd destroyed his life out of jealousy. He did tell people. His friends, his family, mutual acquaintances, painted me as the crazy, jealous girlfriend who couldn't handle him having a female friend at work. Some people believed him. The ones who saw the card and heard the recording didn't. Jenna reached out to apologize, said she genuinely believed we were in an open relationship, that she never would have gotten involved if she'd known he was lying. She felt used and stupid, which, honestly, same. We got coffee once and compared notes on all the lies he'd told. Turned out he'd been telling her I was emotionally unavailable, and our relationship was basically over. We were just waiting for the lease to end. The detail he'd put into constructing separate realities for both of us was genuinely impressive. He'd managed to convince Jenna she was the understanding other woman in an ethical, non-monogamous situation, and convinced me he was just working late. The effort that took was probably more than just being honest would have required. I moved out officially last month. He's still telling people I overreacted to him having a work friend. Still claiming Jenna was delusional and obsessed. Still insisting nothing physical happened despite all evidence to the contrary. The commitment to the lie even after everything fell apart is almost respectable in its stubbornness. I kept the card. Sounds weird, but it's a reminder to trust my instincts. The second I saw those words, "Thank you for sharing him," I knew something was wrong. My gut was right, and the next time I feel that instinct, I won't second guess it or let someone convince me I'm being paranoid. Work relationships can get messy, but permanent ink, that's commitment. And one husband's secret tattoo turned out to be a commitment his wife definitely didn't know about. We were on a beach trip with a group of friends, one of those long weekend getaways where everyone's just trying to relax and forget about real life for a few days. My husband had taken his shirt off to go swimming, and I noticed something I'd never seen before. A small tattoo on his ribs, just under his left arm. Roman numerals in a delicate script. It looked relatively new, the ink still sharp and dark against his skin. I asked him about it that night back at the hotel. Casual question, just, "Hey, when did you get that tattoo? I've never noticed it before." He said he'd gotten it a few months ago, that it was just a date that was meaningful to him. I asked what date. He said it was personal and kind of brushed me off, saying we should get ready for dinner. That response sat weird with me. We'd been married for 6 years. I knew about his other tattoos, the stories behind them, why he'd gotten each one. This secretive response about a new one didn't match how he usually talked about his ink. So later, when he was in the shower, I looked up a Roman numeral translator on my phone and typed in the numbers from his tattoo. The date it gave me was my best friend's birthday, the same best friend who'd been in our lives since college, who'd been a bridesmaid at our wedding, who came over for dinner every week. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to make it make sense. There had to be another explanation. Maybe it was a different significant date that just happened to match her birthday. Maybe I'd read the numerals wrong. I waited until after dinner to bring it up again, when we were alone walking on the beach. I asked him directly if the tattoo was my best friend's birthday. His whole body language changed. He got defensive immediately, asking why I was interrogating him about a tattoo, saying I was being paranoid and seeing things that weren't there. The deflection was answer enough, but I pushed. I told him I'd translated the numerals and knew exactly what date it was. He tried to play it off, saying lots of people share that date, that it was a coincidence I was reading into. I asked him point blank to tell me why he had my best friend's birthday tattooed on his body. He said I was being crazy and ruining the trip. Then he walked back to the hotel without me. I called my best friend from the beach. It was late, but I didn't care. I asked her if something had happened between her and my husband. She got very quiet. Then she said they'd had a moment years ago, before we got married, but nothing actually happened. Just some feelings that they'd both moved past. She asked why I was asking. I told her about the tattoo. She went silent for even longer. Then she said she didn't know about any tattoo, that if he'd gotten one, it wasn't because of her, that I was putting her in a really awkward position by asking about this. The way she said it, defensive and uncomfortable, told me there was more to the story. When I got back to the hotel room, my husband was asleep, or pretending to be. I couldn't sleep at all, just lay there thinking about the timeline. We'd been married 6 years, together for 8. If he'd gotten the tattoo a few months ago, like he said, and it was her birthday, there had to be a recent reason. The next morning, I went through our wedding photos on my laptop. I'd never had reason to look at them suspiciously before, but I found the getting ready shots where my husband was changing into his wedding shirt. Several photos of him shirtless with his groomsmen. No tattoo. His ribs were completely clear, so he'd gotten it after we were married. A tattoo of my best friend's birthday, placed somewhere intimate that I wouldn't normally see, gotten at some point in the past 6 years without telling me. I showed him the wedding photos, pointed out the absence of the tattoo, asked him again when he'd really gotten it and why. He tried to stick to his story for about 30 seconds before he just broke down. Said he got it 2 years ago during what he called a rough patch in our marriage. I didn't remember us having a rough patch 2 years ago. I remembered a normal year, maybe a little stressful with work stuff, but nothing that seemed like a marital crisis. He said I hadn't noticed because he'd been dealing with it internally, and during that time he'd gotten close to my best friend. They'd talked about their feelings, he'd almost left me for her, but ultimately decided to stay and work on our marriage. The casual way he said almost left me for her, like it was a minor decision he'd made about switching jobs or buying a different car, was genuinely surreal. I asked if they'd slept together. He said no, it was just emotional. Just emotional, like an emotional affair that nearly ended our marriage was somehow less of a betrayal. I asked if she knew about the tattoo. He hesitated, then admitted yes, she knew. They'd discussed it before he got it. She'd told him it was a bad idea, but he'd done it anyway because he needed something to remember that time in his life when he'd felt truly understood by someone. I called my best friend back immediately. Didn't care that it was early morning. I asked her if she knew my husband had her birthday tattooed on his body. She started crying, saying she'd told him not to do it, that it was inappropriate and would cause problems if I ever found out. I asked her how long they'd been emotionally involved. She said it had been on and off for years, started before our wedding with mutual attraction they'd both tried to ignore, continued after the wedding with late-night conversations and emotional intimacy that crossed lines but never became physical. 2 years ago, it had almost become something more, but they'd both pulled back because they didn't want to hurt me. And here's where it gets absurd. She actually said they'd stayed emotionally connected because they cared about me too much to have a real affair. Like their emotional betrayal was somehow noble because they'd drawn the line at sex. Like years of secret feelings and intimate conversations behind my back were acts of loyalty. I asked her if she understood how insane that sounded. She said I was upset and not thinking clearly, that what they had was complicated but ultimately harmless since nothing physical happened. I told her our friendship was over and hung up. My husband tried to minimize it, saying it was just a tattoo, that it didn't mean anything anymore, that he'd chosen me and that should be what matters. I pointed out that choosing me while maintaining an emotional affair with my best friend and getting her birthday permanently inked on his body wasn't actually choosing me at all. He said I was overreacting, that people have complicated feelings and it doesn't negate our marriage. I asked him how he'd feel if I had another man's birthday tattooed on my ribs after years of emotional intimacy with him behind my husband's back. He said that was different. I asked how. He didn't have an answer. I cut the beach trip short and drove home alone. Let him figure out his own way back. I spent the drive trying to reframe every memory from the past 6 years, looking for signs I'd missed. Every time my best friend had come over for dinner, had she and my husband exchanged looks I hadn't noticed? Every time he'd worked late, had he been texting her? Every inside joke, every casual touch, every moment I'd thought was innocent friendship. Was it something else? When I got home, I went through his phone. He'd left it behind in his rush to pack, probably forgotten it in the chaos of me leaving. I found years of messages between them. Nothing explicitly sexual, but intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. Her asking about his day, him venting about work stress to her instead of me, her sending him songs that reminded her of him telling her she understood him in ways nobody else did. There were messages from 2 years ago, around the time he got the tattoo, where they clearly discussed leaving their respective lives and being together. They'd planned it out, talked about how they'd tell me, where they'd move. Then messages from him saying he couldn't do it, that he loved me and wanted to make our marriage work. Her saying she understood and would support whatever he decided. Messages from after that, them agreeing to maintain distance but stay friends. Then messages from 6 months later showing they'd immediately fallen back into the same emotional intimacy. This pattern repeated over and over. They'd get too close, pull back, promise to maintain boundaries, then slide right back into inappropriate territory. The most recent messages were from the week before our beach trip. Her asking if he ever regretted not choosing her. Him saying sometimes, but he'd made his choice. Her sending a heart emoji. Him sending one back. I called a lawyer the next day, filed for divorce that week. My husband came back from the beach trip shocked that I was actually leaving, saying he thought we'd talk it out and move past this, move past years of emotional betrayal and a permanent reminder of it tattooed on his body. The disconnect from reality was staggering. He tried to argue that since nothing physical happened, it shouldn't count as infidelity in the divorce. My lawyer laughed and said emotional affairs are still affairs, and the tattoo was physical evidence of ongoing emotional investment in another woman. Combined with the messages I'd screenshotted, we had a pretty solid case. My former best friend has tried to reach out multiple times. Long letters about how sorry she is, how she never meant to hurt me, how she values our friendship more than her feelings for my husband. I've returned every letter unopened. She doesn't get to have both. She chose him years ago when they started this emotional affair. Now she can have him without me in the picture. My husband has been telling people I'm divorcing him over a tattoo. Technically true, but he leaves out the context of what the tattoo represents. Some mutual friends have taken his side, saying I'm being harsh, that emotional connections happen and shouldn't end a marriage. Those people are also cut off now. The friends who matter, the ones who saw the messages and understood the full scope of the betrayal, have been supportive. They're horrified that this went on for years under everyone's noses. Some admitted they'd noticed my best friend and my husband seemed close but assumed it was innocent friendship. I've had to relearn how to trust my own judgment. I didn't see this happening in my own marriage with my own best friend. What else am I missing? Who else in my life is hiding things? The paranoia is exhausting, but I can't seem to shut it off. My husband's still trying to reconcile, sending messages about how he'll get the tattoo removed, how he's cut off contact with her, how he'll do whatever it takes, but it's too late. The tattoo was just the visible symbol of years of betrayal. Removing it doesn't erase what it represented or the choices he made. He keeps saying it's just a tattoo, like that makes any of this better. It's not just a tattoo. It's a permanent mark of choosing someone else while pretending to choose me. It's proof that for years, every time he took his shirt off, he was carrying a secret tribute to another woman. And now it's evidence in my divorce filing. Secret tattoos are one thing, but sometimes the most devastating revelations come not from what we discover, but from what our parents deliberately hid, as this next person found out when they opened their mother's old journal. I was helping my mum pack up her house for a move to a smaller place, sorting through decades of accumulated stuff that nobody really needs, but everyone keeps anyway. Boxes of old clothes, kitchen gadgets she'd never used, photo albums from before digital cameras existed. Standard moving day chaos. I was in her closet pulling down boxes from the top shelf when one of them slipped and hit the floor, spilling contents everywhere. Mostly papers, old cards, random keepsakes, and a journal, leather-bound and worn, with the year I was born embossed on the cover. I'd never seen it before. I know you're not supposed to read other people's journals. I know that. But this was from the year I was born, and I'd always had questions about that time in our lives that my mum never really answered. So I opened it. The first few entries were normal, talking about her pregnancy, her excitement and fear about becoming a mum. Then the tone shifted. She started writing about him with this intense anger that practically burned through the pages. How much she hated him, how she'd made the right choice, how she never wanted to see him again. I assumed she was talking about my biological father. I'd grown up being told he'd abandoned us before I was born, that he wanted nothing to do with being a dad, that we were better off without him. These journal entries seemed to confirm that story. Her anger totally justified if he'd just bailed on his pregnant girlfriend. But then I found an entry from a few months after I was born that made my blood run cold. Saw him at the grocery store with his family today. He still doesn't know about our son. Good. I read that line probably 10 times. He still doesn't know about our son. Not he abandoned his son. Not he doesn't care about his son. He doesn't know about his son. My mom had never told my biological father I existed. My entire life story, the foundational narrative of why it was just me and my mum, was based on a lie. He hadn't abandoned us. He'd never been given the choice. She'd disappeared and never told him she was pregnant. I kept reading, going back through earlier entries, looking for his name, found it scattered throughout the pages before I was born. His name was Marcus. They dated for about a year. She'd loved him, or at least the early entries suggested she had. Then something happened that she never fully explained in the journal. Just vague references to him showing his true colors, and her seeing who he really was. Whatever happened, she'd decided to cut him out completely, moved to a different part of town, blocked his number, avoided places he might be. When she found out she was pregnant, she'd already made the decision not to tell him. The journal entries after that were her justifying the choice to herself, building up this narrative of protecting me from him. I sat on her closet floor reading this journal for probably 2 hours. My mom downstairs packing the kitchen, completely unaware that I'd just discovered she'd lied to me for my entire life. 26 years of believing my father didn't want me, when really he'd never known I existed. I found his full name in an entry where she'd written about running into his brother, Marcus Sullivan. I pulled out my phone and searched for him on social media, hands shaking, found several Marcus Sullivans, but one was the right age and lived in our state. His profile picture showed him with 3 kids, teenagers, and a younger one, all smiling at the camera. I stared at that photo for a long time. Those were my half-siblings. That man was my father, and none of them had any idea I existed. I sent him a message before I could overthink it, kept it simple, said I had reason to believe he'd dated my mother 27 years ago and that I might be his son. Left my phone number. He called within 5 minutes. Not a text back, not a message, an actual video call. I answered and saw his face for the first time, and it was like looking at a male version of myself. Same eyes, same nose, same slightly crooked smile. He was crying before either of us said anything, just looking at me and crying. Then he said my mum's name, asked if she was my mother. I confirmed, and he just put his head in his hands for a minute, composing himself. When he looked back up, he asked how old I was. I told him 26. He did the math in his head and started crying again. Said he'd loved my mum, that she'd disappeared without explanation, and he'd spent months trying to find her, figure out what happened. Eventually, he'd assumed she'd moved on, met someone else, wanted a clean break. He'd never known she was pregnant, never knew I existed, had wondered about her over the years, hoped she was happy, but never imagined there was a child. I told him about the journal, about discovering the truth just hours ago. He asked what she'd told me about him. I explained the abandonment story, how I'd grown up thinking he'd wanted nothing to do with me. He looked devastated, said he would have been there. He would have wanted to be part of my life. He'd have done anything if he'd known. We talked for 3 hours that first call. He told me about his life, his wife, his 3 kids. Showed me pictures, introduced me to his family over video. His wife was shocked but supportive. His kids were confused but excited to learn they had an older brother. The youngest one, maybe 10 years old, immediately started asking when she could meet me. We met in person last month. He drove 6 hours to meet me at a coffee shop halfway between our cities, hugged me before we even said hello, just held on to me like he was afraid I'd disappear too. We spent the whole day together, talking, comparing our lives, finding all these weird similarities in our interests and mannerisms that made sense now. He asked if he could tell his kids and his wife that I was his son, if we could make this official somehow. I said yes. He cried again. I might have cried too. It was a lot. My mum found out when I came home that evening and she asked where I'd been all day. I told her the truth. That I'd found her journal, discovered she'd never told Marcus about me, and that I'd just spent the day with my father for the first time in my life. The look on her face was something between fury and panic. She immediately started asking how I could go behind her back like that, invade her privacy, contact him without discussing it with her first. I pointed out that she kept him from me for 26 years, without discussing it with me, so maybe we were even on the going behind backs thing. She said I didn't understand, that she'd had good reasons for not telling him. I asked what those reasons were. She said it was complicated, that I was too young to understand at the time. I reminded her I'm 26 and would love to understand now. She wouldn't tell me, just kept saying she'd had good reasons. She'd done what was best for me. I'd thank her someday when I knew the whole story. I asked when I'd get to know the whole story. She said when I was ready to hear it. I told her I was ready right now. Still nothing. Just vague statements about protecting me and doing what she thought was right. I asked her how lying to me for my entire life was protecting me. She said I was being unfair, that she'd raised me alone, sacrificed everything for me, and this was how I repaid her. The guilt trip was impressive in its shamelessness. She'd lied to both me and my father for over 2 decades, and somehow I was the bad guy for wanting the truth. Things escalated when I told her I was planning to build a relationship with Marcus and his family. She said absolutely not, that she wouldn't allow it. I pointed out I'm an adult and she can't actually forbid me from having a relationship with my own father. She said if I pursued this, it would damage our relationship irreparably. The ultimatum was clear. Choose her or choose him. Accept her version of events without question or lose her. The manipulation was so blatant it almost didn't even make me angry, just sad. This was really how she was going to handle getting caught in a massive lie. I told her I wasn't choosing between them, I was choosing to have both of them in my life, and if she had a problem with that, she needed to work through it. She hasn't spoken to me since. It's been 3 weeks. Marcus, meanwhile, has been amazing. He's introduced me to extended family, included me in family dinners, treated me like I've always been part of his life. His kids call me their brother. His wife goes out of her way to make me feel welcome. It's the family I never knew I wanted because I didn't know it was an option. But that wasn't even the worst part. Last week, one of my mum's friends reached out, said she'd heard about the situation and felt I deserved to know the truth. Turns out the big terrible reason my mum had for cutting Marcus out of her life was that he'd proposed and she got scared. That's it. He'd wanted to marry her, she panicked about commitment, and instead of having an adult conversation, she just disappeared. There was no abuse, no betrayal, no dramatic reason. She just got cold feet and decided the easiest solution was to vanish and never tell him she was pregnant. Then she spent 26 years building him up as some villain in her mind to justify what she'd done. The triviality of it is almost worse than if there had been a real reason. She kept me from my father, let me believe I was unwanted, because she was afraid of commitment. The selfishness is staggering. I confronted her with this information. She admitted it was true, but insisted I didn't understand the pressure she'd been under, how young and scared she was. I asked if being young and scared justified lying to your child for their entire life. She said I was being cruel and judging her for mistakes she made decades ago. I told her the mistake wasn't getting scared and leaving. The mistake was never telling the truth, never giving Marcus a chance to be a father, never giving me a chance to know him. She could have reached out at any point in 26 years, and she chose not to. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice she made over and over again. She hung up on me. Haven't heard from her since. Marcus says to give her time, that she's probably dealing with a lot of guilt and shame. His empathy for the woman who kept me from him is remarkable. I'm not quite there yet. I'm building a relationship with my father and his family. It's weird and wonderful, and sometimes sad thinking about all the years we missed. But we're making up for it now. And if my mum can't accept that, can't admit what she did was wrong, then that's her loss. Parents keeping secrets about our origins is devastating, but sometimes those secrets unravel in real time, like when one brother's birthday celebration turned into the most awkward confrontation imaginable. We'd been planning my brother's 30th birthday party for weeks. Big milestone, worth celebrating properly, so he'd rented out the back room at his favorite restaurant, invited everyone he cared about, the whole deal. By 8 o'clock, the party was in full swing, music playing, people laughing, my brother holding court in the middle of it all, looking genuinely happy. Then the door opened and his ex-girlfriend walked in. Not just any ex, the ex he'd dated for 3 years before they broke up 6 months ago, in what he'd described as a mutual drama-free split. Except she didn't look drama-free standing in the doorway. She looked determined and visibly pregnant. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It was more like a wave, conversations dropping off as people noticed her, then noticed her stomach, then noticed my brother's face draining of all color. Within maybe 10 seconds, you could have heard a pin drop in that packed room. She walked right up to him, and I have to give her credit for the composure because every eye in the place was on her. She smiled, not friendly but not cruel either, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Congratulations, you're going to be a father in 3 months." My brother just stood there, mouth open, clearly trying to process what was happening. His current girlfriend, who he'd been dating for about 4 months, grabbed his arm and asked what she was talking about. My brother stammered something about how that wasn't possible. They'd been broken up for 6 months, the timeline didn't work. His ex pulled out her phone, pulled up what was clearly an ultrasound photo, and held it out to him. I was standing close enough to see the date on it. 4 months ago. She said they'd hooked up 4 months ago when they'd tried to reconcile, that she'd found out she was pregnant a few weeks later and had been trying to reach him ever since. My brother's current girlfriend's face went through several expressions very quickly. Confusion, understanding, betrayal, fury. She asked him if he'd hooked up with his ex 4 months ago. 4 months ago, they'd already been dating. My brother tried to explain, saying it was complicated. It was just one time. It didn't mean anything. His girlfriend picked up her drink from the table and threw it directly in his face. Just full on tossed a glass of wine at him in front of everyone. Then she grabbed her purse and walked out. The ex watched this happen with absolutely no expression, which was somehow more intimidating than if she'd looked smug about it. My brother was wiping wine off his face with his sleeve, trying to maintain some dignity, and asked his ex why she was doing this here, now, in front of everyone. She said she'd been trying to reach him for weeks. He'd blocked her number after their reconciliation attempt failed. She'd sent emails, he'd filtered them. She'd gone to his apartment, he'd refused to answer. So she'd found out about the party through mutual friends and figured he couldn't ignore her in front of his entire family. The logic was sound, honestly. Hard to ghost someone who's standing in front of you announcing a pregnancy. My brother said they needed to talk privately. His ex said no, they'd talk right here, since apparently public confrontation was the only way to get his attention. She told him she was keeping the baby, she wasn't asking for a relationship, but she needed him to acknowledge what was happening and step up for his kid. He tried to question if it was even his. She'd apparently anticipated that because she pulled up her phone again and showed him a detailed timeline of when they'd hooked up, when she'd found out she was pregnant, and when the due date was. Everything lined up. He asked if she'd been with anyone else. She said no, and even if she had, the dates proved it was his. The party guests were all just standing there, watching this unfold like it was a reality TV show. Nobody knew whether to leave or stay, whether to pretend not to be listening or openly eavesdrop. Most people had settled on the openly eavesdropping option. My brother's friends started chiming in, a couple of them suggesting she could be lying, that she should take a paternity test before making accusations. His ex said she'd be happy to do a paternity test, that she'd actually brought paperwork for one with her, because she'd figured he'd demand it. She pulled folded papers out of her purse and handed them to him. The level of preparation she'd brought to this confrontation was genuinely impressive. She'd planned for every objection, every deflection, every possible response. My brother was completely outmaneuvered. My mum, who'd been frozen in shock up until this point, asked the ex if they could please talk about this privately, that this wasn't the time or place. The ex said she'd tried private. She'd tried calling, texting, emailing, showing up at his door. Private hadn't worked, so here they were. My dad asked my brother if it was true, if he'd hooked up with his ex while dating his current girlfriend. My brother admitted yes, it had happened once. He'd made a mistake. My dad asked why he'd blocked her instead of dealing with it like an adult. My brother said he'd thought they were done, that the reconciliation hookup proved they didn't work together, and he'd wanted a clean break. The ex laughed at that. Not a happy laugh, more like disbelief, Said a clean break would have been not sleeping with her while dating someone else. My brother told her that was unfair. They'd both agreed to try one more time. She said trying one more time didn't include lying to his new girlfriend about it. And here's where it gets absurd. My brother's best friend, trying to be supportive, suggested maybe the pregnancy was an accident and she was using it to trap my brother into a relationship. The ex turned to him and said, point blank, she didn't want a relationship with my brother. She wanted him to be a father to his child, and if he thought those were the same thing, he should probably examine that. The best friend shut up after that. The ex turned back to my brother and said she'd be in touch about the paternity test, that she'd give him a week to process everything, but after that she expected him to start acting like a responsible adult. Then she left. The silence after she walked out was deafening. Then everyone started talking at once. People asking my brother what he was going to do, whether he believed her, whether he'd take the test. My mom crying, my dad looking disappointed. Friends trying to give advice that ranged from supportive to terrible. The party was obviously over. People started making excuses to leave, offering awkward congratulations or condolences, depending on their read of the situation. Within 20 minutes, the room had cleared out except for immediate family. My brother sat down and put his head in his hands. My mom asked if the baby was his. He said probably. She asked about his current girlfriend. He said that relationship was obviously done after the wine-throwing incident. She asked why he'd hooked up with his ex. He said he didn't know. Moment of weakness, nostalgia, stupidity. My dad asked why he'd blocked her instead of having a conversation. My brother said he'd panicked, that he'd realized immediately after hooking up that it was a mistake, and he'd wanted to move forward with his new relationship without the complication. My dad pointed out that avoiding complications doesn't make them disappear. Then came the breaking point. My sister, who'd been quiet this whole time, asked if he'd used protection. My brother said no. My sister asked if he'd at least been honest with his current girlfriend about the timeline. He admitted no. He told her he'd been single for several months before they started dating. So not only had he cheated, he'd lied about being available, then avoided the consequences until his ex had to crash his birthday party to get his attention. The layers of poor decisions were honestly staggering. The family split pretty quickly on how to handle it. My mom thinks he should step up, be there for the baby regardless of how it happened. My dad agrees, but thinks my brother needs to apologize to everyone involved first. My sister thinks the ex is right to demand accountability, and my brother got what he deserved. My aunts and uncles who were at the party have their own opinions. Half think the ex is trying to trap him, that she should have handled this privately, that crashing his party was manipulative. The other half thinks she'd exhausted private options, and my brother forced her hand by blocking her. The family group chat has been a war zone for days, people taking sides, arguing about responsibility and timing, and whether the ex had the right to make a scene. My brother's been mostly silent through all of it, which probably isn't helping his case. He did reach out to his current girlfriend to apologize. She told him to lose her number and never contact her again. Fair response, honestly. He'd cheated on her, lied about his past, then had his pregnant ex crash his birthday party. Not really a recoverable situation. The paternity test is scheduled for next month. My brother's convinced it's his, says the timeline matches up too perfectly, and his ex has no reason to lie. He started looking into father's rights and child support calculators, trying to prepare for what's coming. His ex has been surprisingly professional about the whole thing since the party. She sent him information about prenatal care, asked for his medical history for the doctors, suggested they figure out a co-parenting plan. She's treating this like a business arrangement, which seems to be the healthiest approach given their history. My brother's friends have been less helpful, some encouraging him to demand the paternity test results before doing anything, others suggesting he could just not be involved if he didn't want to. The advice ranges from practical to absolutely unhinged, and I'm not sure he's in the headspace to filter it properly. I've tried to stay neutral, but honestly, I think his ex handled this better than he did. She tried every private avenue, he blocked them all, so she went public. Was it embarrassing? Absolutely. But he'd backed her into that corner by refusing to engage like an adult. The whole family is waiting for the test results now, even though we all know what they'll say. And depending on how my brother handles the next few months, this is either going to be the wake-up call he needed or the start of a very messy co-parenting situation. Unexpected pregnancies can definitely destroy a party, but sometimes the past shows up in even more shocking ways, like when one Redditor's grandmother's hidden letters revealed a truth that shattered everything they knew. After my grandma passed away last year, the whole family came together to help clean out her house. She'd lived there for over 50 years, and as you can imagine, there was a lot of stuff to sort through. My aunt took the main floor, my uncle handled the garage, and I volunteered for the attic because nobody else wanted to deal with the heat and dust up there. I was moving boxes and old furniture when I found a small wooden box tucked behind some Christmas decorations in the far corner. It had a lock on it, one of those old-fashioned brass locks that looked like it came from another era. I brought it downstairs and we spent 20 minutes trying different keys from my grandma's collection before my uncle just forced it open with a screwdriver. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all carefully preserved in chronological order, tied with a faded ribbon. The envelopes were addressed to my grandmother at a P.O. box I'd never heard of, and the return address just said Richard Thompson, with a town name about 2 hours from where my grandparents had lived. I opened the first one, dated from 1964. It was a love letter, not the casual kind, but the deep, passionate kind that made me uncomfortable reading it about my grandmother. Richard wrote about missing her, about their future together, about how difficult it was to be apart. I checked the date again. 1964, my grandparents got married in 1963. I kept reading, feeling increasingly weird about it, but unable to stop. The letters continued through 1964 and into 1965, getting more intense. Then I found one from April 1965 that made my hands go numb. Richard wrote about how excited he was about our son and how he wished he could be there for the birth, but understood why that wasn't possible. He promised to always love their child, even if he could never publicly claim him. My dad was born in May 1965. I just sat there on my grandma's attic floor, holding this letter, doing math in my head that I really didn't want to be doing. My aunt came upstairs asking if I'd found anything interesting, and I just handed her the box without saying anything. She read through the same letters I had, and I watched her face go completely white. She looked at me and said we needed to talk to my uncle privately before saying anything to anyone else. We went into my grandma's bedroom and closed the door, spread the letters out on the bed, and started piecing together a timeline. The letters stopped abruptly in June 1965, right after my dad was born. There was one final letter from Richard, saying he understood why she couldn't continue their relationship, that he'd respect her wishes and stay away, but he'd always wonder about his son. My grandmother had apparently chosen to stay with my grandfather and raise the baby as his. My aunt pulled up ancestry records on her phone, found Richard Thompson's obituary from 10 years ago. He'd lived in the same town his whole life, married someone else in 1967, had 2 daughters, died of a heart attack at 73. The obituary mentioned his daughters and their children, my dad's half-sisters, and their kids that he'd never known existed. We debated for hours about whether to tell my dad. My uncle argued that my grandma had taken this secret to her grave for a reason, that some things were better left buried. My aunt said Dad deserved to know the truth about his own parentage. I just wanted to unknow what I'd discovered, but that wasn't an option anymore. We decided to tell him, showed him the letters, watched him read through them with this expression of growing horror. He kept looking at the dates, the timeline, doing the same math we'd done. When he finished reading, he just sat there in silence for probably 10 minutes before asking if we were sure. We told him about Richard Thompson's obituary, about the timeline matching perfectly. My dad said maybe the letters were fake. Maybe this was some elaborate story my grandma had made up for some reason. But why would she keep them hidden in a locked box in her attic? Why would she never mention them to anyone? My aunt suggested a DNA test. My dad initially refused, said he didn't want to know, that my grandfather was his father regardless of biology. But I could see it eating at him over the next few weeks. Finally, he agreed to do an ancestry DNA test, just to settle it one way or another. The results came back 6 weeks later. My dad had multiple DNA matches with people he'd never heard of. Strong matches, the kind that indicate close family relationships. We looked them up. They were Richard Thompson's grandchildren, the kids of those 2 daughters mentioned in his obituary. My grandfather, the man who'd raised my dad, who'd taught him to fish and helped him with homework and walked him down the aisle at his wedding, wasn't his biological father. My dad just stared at the computer screen, showing the DNA results, and started crying. 58 years old and finding out his entire identity was based on a lie. He didn't tell my mum at first, just processed it alone for a few days. When he finally told her, she immediately wanted to know who else knew, worried about how this would affect the family. My dad said he didn't care about the family dynamics. He just wanted to understand why my grandma had lied to him his whole life. We tried to piece together what happened. Best guess is my grandma had an affair with Richard while married to my grandfather, got pregnant, and chose to stay in her marriage rather than run off with her lover. My grandfather either never knew or knew and chose to raise my dad as his own anyway. We'd never know for sure since both my grandparents were gone. And here's where it gets absurd. Richard Thompson's daughters reached out after seeing my dad's profile on Ancestry. They'd been curious about some DNA matches that didn't fit their known family tree and had done some investigating. When they saw my dad's name and age, they'd pulled out their father's old papers and found copies of letters he'd kept, mirror images of the ones we'd found in my grandma's attic. They wanted to meet their half-brother, wanted him to meet his nieces and nephews, wanted to welcome him into their family. My dad didn't know how to handle it. These were strangers with his DNA, people he'd never known existed, suddenly wanting a relationship based on biology alone. My grandfather's side of the family found out through my uncle, who apparently couldn't keep his mouth shut. They were furious, called my aunt and me horrible for even looking into it, for getting the DNA test, for not just letting sleeping dogs lie. My grandfather's sister said we disrespected his memory by suggesting he wasn't my dad's real father. The distinction between biological and real father became a major point of contention. My dad said my grandfather was his real father in every way that mattered, that biology didn't change 58 years of memories and love. My grandfather's family agreed. Richard Thompson's daughters said biology absolutely mattered, that their father had a right to be acknowledged even posthumously. Then came the breaking point. My dad's younger sister, my aunt who'd helped uncover all this, admitted she'd always suspected something was off, said my dad looked nothing like my grandfather or anyone on that side of the family, that my grandma had always been weird about family medical history when it came to my dad. She'd kept quiet because it wasn't her place to say anything, but the DNA results just confirmed what she'd wondered about for years. My dad felt betrayed all over again. His own sister had suspected for years and never said anything. My aunt tried to explain that it was just a vague suspicion, nothing concrete, and what was she supposed to say without proof? My dad said she could have mentioned it at literally any point in the past few decades. The family is fractured now. My grandfather's siblings won't speak to those of us who push for the truth. Richard Thompson's daughters keep inviting my dad to family events that he doesn't attend. My dad is in therapy trying to process having his entire identity rewritten at nearly 60 years old. He told me last week that he wishes we'd never found those letters, that some secrets should stay buried. Part of me agrees, but another part thinks he deserved to know the truth, even if it hurt. I don't know which part is right. My grandma's been gone for over a year now, and she's still causing family drama from beyond the grave. The locked box in her attic contained more than just old letters. It contained a truth that's rewritten our entire family history, and I'm not sure we'll ever fully recover from it. My dad hasn't decided whether to pursue a relationship with Richard Thompson's family. They're patient, saying they'll wait as long as he needs. My grandfather's family says any relationship with them would be a betrayal. My dad is stuck in the middle, trying to honor both the man who raised him and the biological reality he never asked to know about. Family revelations can rewrite your entire identity, but at least those usually come from the past. This next bride had her wedding destroyed by something she recognized in the present moment. I was sitting in the front row at my sister's wedding rehearsal, watching everything come together for what was supposed to be her big day tomorrow. The venue looked beautiful, flowers everywhere, chairs set up perfectly, everything she'd planned for months finally materializing. My sister was glowing, checking details with the wedding planner, making sure every little thing was exactly right. Then the minister walked out to take his place at the altar, and I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I knew that face. I knew it intimately, actually, from 4 years of dating in college that had ended in the worst possible way. That was my ex-boyfriend, the one who'd ghosted me after draining $3,000 from my checking account, the one I'd filed a police report about, the one who'd disappeared so thoroughly I'd assumed he'd left the state, except he was standing at my sister's wedding altar, wearing ministerial robes and using a different last name. I checked the program. Reverend Michael Patterson. His real name was Michael Brennan, or at least that's what it had been when we dated. I sat through the rehearsal in a daze, watching him guide my sister and her fiancé through the ceremony, his voice calm and professional, nothing like the panicked tone he'd used when I'd confronted him about my missing money before he vanished. He didn't seem to recognize me, or if he did, he was doing an excellent job of pretending I didn't exist. The second the rehearsal ended, I waited until everyone else had filtered out toward the restaurant for the rehearsal dinner. My sister was still talking to the wedding planner, her fiancé was with his groomsmen, and the minister was packing up his materials. I walked up to him slowly, watched him freeze when he finally looked at my face. He went pale, actually stammered my name like a question, like he wasn't sure it was really me. I asked him what he was doing here, using a fake name, pretending to be a minister at my sister's wedding. He started talking fast, the same rushed, defensive tone I remembered from when I'd caught him in lies before. He begged me not to say anything, said he'd found God, turned his life around, become a completely different person. The name change was part of leaving his old life behind. He was doing good work now, helping people celebrate their marriages, giving back to the community. He asked if we could talk somewhere private. We stepped outside and he continued his pitch. Said he knew what he'd done to me was unforgivable, that he'd been in a dark place back then, struggling with addiction and making terrible choices, but he'd gotten clean, gotten ordained online, started building a new life. He'd paid back debts to other people. He was working on being better. He just needed me to give him a chance, not destroy the life he'd built. I asked him point blank if he was even legally ordained. He said yes, absolutely. He had the certificate and everything. I asked if he'd paid me back the $3,000 he stole. He went quiet. Said he'd intended to, that it was on his list, but he'd had other debts that were more pressing. The audacity to ask me to keep quiet about his theft, while admitting he'd chosen to pay back other people first, was genuinely breathtaking. I told him I was telling my sister. He grabbed my arm, not hard but desperate, and begged me to reconsider. Said it would ruin her wedding, devastate her, cause unnecessary drama on what should be the happiest day of her life. I pointed out that having her wedding officiated by a thief using a fake name seemed like the kind of thing she'd want to know about. He let go of my arm and changed tactics. Said fine, he'd step down as the minister, claim a family emergency, recommend a replacement. That way the wedding could go on, and I wouldn't have to tell my sister the ugly details. I asked why I'd protect his secret. He said because the truth would hurt her unnecessarily, because I'd be the bad guy who ruined her wedding, because some things were better left buried. I walked away from him and went straight to my sister. She was at the restaurant with her fiancé, laughing at something someone had said, completely happy. I hated what I was about to do, but I hated the alternative more. I pulled her aside and told her I needed to talk to her privately about the minister. She looked confused, asked if something was wrong with the ceremony plan. I said something was wrong with the minister himself, that I knew him from college, and she needed to hear the whole story. We went outside and I explained everything, how we'd dated, how he'd stolen from me, how he'd disappeared, how he was using a different name now. She didn't believe me at first, said I must be mistaken, that Reverend Patterson had impeccable references, came highly recommended, had done beautiful ceremonies for several of her friends. I pulled up old photos on my phone, me and Michael from college, clearly the same person as her minister, just younger and using his real name. I showed her the police report I still had saved as a PDF from when I'd tried to press charges. I gave her the dates, the details, everything. She went very still, the kind of still that comes before an explosion. Then she said she needed to talk to him. I warned her he'd try to explain it away, claim he'd changed, use his faith as a shield. She said she didn't care. She needed to hear it from him. We confronted him together at the restaurant, pulled him into a private room. My sister asked him point blank if he was my ex-boyfriend, Michael Brennan. He tried to deny it at first, then realized I'd already shown her proof. He admitted yes, that was his birth name, but he'd legally changed it as part of his fresh start. She asked about the theft. He admitted that too, but said he'd repented, made amends, become a new person in Christ. My sister asked if he'd made amends with me specifically. He said he'd been meaning to reach out, that seeing me here was actually Providence giving him the opportunity to apologize and make things right. My sister asked if he was legally ordained. He said yes, showed her a certificate from some online ministry. She took a photo of it and said she needed to verify it independently. He got defensive, asked if she didn't trust him. She said no, actually she didn't, given he'd lied about his name and stolen from her sister. That night, my sister called the organization listed on his ordination certificate. They'd never heard of Michael Patterson or Michael Brennan. The certificate was fake. She found online reviews from other couples mentioning him, several noting that when they'd tried to file their marriage licenses, they'd discovered the ceremonies weren't legally binding because he wasn't actually ordained. My sister cancelled the wedding, called everyone, returned gifts, ate the deposits on everything that couldn't be refunded. Her fiancé was supportive, horrified that they'd almost had a fake marriage ceremony, but the devastation of calling off a wedding the day before was brutal to watch. But that wasn't even the worst part. Once my sister started digging, she found at least 6 other couples who discovered their marriages weren't legal after ceremonies performed by Michael Patterson. Some had been married for over a year before they found out. Some had filed taxes jointly, made major life decisions based on a marriage that didn't legally exist. My sister reported him to the police. Turns out performing fake marriage ceremonies and accepting payment for them is fraud. Multiple couples joined the complaint. He's now facing criminal charges in addition to civil suits from the couples whose marriages weren't legal. The family reaction has been split in the most frustrating way possible. My parents support my sister and understand why she cancelled, but several aunts and uncles have been saying I should have kept quiet, that I ruined her wedding over ancient history, that everyone deserves a second chance. The mental gymnastics required to blame me instead of the man who literally stole from me, changed his name, and was performing fraudulent marriage ceremonies is genuinely mind-boggling. Like I was supposed to let my sister have a fake marriage ceremony because confronting my thief ex-boyfriend would be awkward. My sister's been amazing through all of this. She's apologized repeatedly for not believing me immediately, for putting me in the position of having to expose someone at her wedding. She's been clear with family that I did the right thing, and anyone blaming me can take it up with her directly. Her fiancé's family has been supportive too, understanding that discovering your minister is a fraud the day before your wedding is traumatic, but better than discovering it after. They've offered to help with a small private ceremony once she's ready, with a definitely real minister this time. My ex has been trying to contact me through mutual friends from college, claiming I've destroyed his life over a grudge, that he was genuinely trying to turn things around. The friends who've passed along these messages have gotten a very detailed explanation of what he actually did, both to me and to multiple couples whose marriages he faked. Most of them have stopped carrying his messages after that. My sister is rescheduling the wedding for next year. She says she needs time to process everything, to trust the process again without questioning every vendor and every detail. Her fiancé completely understands, has been patient and supportive through all of it. I still can't believe he had the nerve to show up at my sister's wedding, using a fake name and performing a ceremony he wasn't qualified to perform. The sheer confidence required to stand in front of someone's family, knowing you're committing fraud, is staggering. And then to beg me to keep quiet about it like I owed him discretion after what he did. The criminal case is moving forward. Multiple victims, clear evidence of fraud, fake credentials. His lawyers apparently trying to argue that he genuinely believed his online ordination was valid, but the fake name and multiple victims make that defense pretty flimsy. My sister and I are closer now than we've been in years. Shared trauma over her ex-minister / my ex-boyfriend / current criminal defendant has a way of bonding people. We joke about writing a memoir called How My Sister Almost Married Me to a Con Artist, though the joke still feels a little too fresh to be actually funny. Sometimes strangers turn out to be people from our past, but other times they turn out to be people who should have been in our present all along. As one person discovered when their dad's old friend showed up with a life-changing claim. I was home for the weekend, just a normal Saturday afternoon, helping my mum in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. My dad answered it and I heard a woman's voice I didn't recognize asking if he was home. He said yes, that was him, and asked who she was. She said her name was Michelle and they were old friends. I glanced out from the kitchen and saw my dad's face go completely pale, like all the blood had just drained out of his head. He stood frozen in the doorway for a few seconds before stepping aside and letting her in. Michelle was maybe in her early 50s, well-dressed, carrying herself with this nervous energy that filled the room. She looked at me and smiled, said I must be his daughter. My dad said yes, this is my daughter. Michelle's smile got a little sad and she said, I meant our daughter. I thought I'd misheard her. The room felt like it tilted sideways. My mum came out of the kitchen asking who was at the door and stopped dead when she saw Michelle. They clearly recognized each other. The tension in that moment was suffocating. Michelle asked if we could all sit down and talk. My dad finally found his voice and asked what she was doing here. Why now after all these years? She said she'd kept her promise for 28 years but couldn't do it anymore, that I deserved to know the truth. I asked what truth. Michelle looked at my parents, then back at me, and explained that she and my dad had a brief affair 28 years ago. She'd gotten pregnant but never told him at the time. She'd made the difficult decision to give the baby up for adoption because she wasn't in a position to be a single mother. My mum was crying now, quiet tears just streaming down her face. I looked at my dad, and he couldn't meet my eyes. I said this didn't make sense, that I wasn't adopted, that these were my parents. Michelle said gently that yes, I was adopted, through a private arrangement at birth. My mum finally spoke up, voice shaking, and admitted that she couldn't have biological children. She and my dad had been trying for years when Michelle got pregnant. They'd arranged a private adoption, all agreed it would be closed with no contact, and they'd raise me as their own without ever telling me I was adopted. The casual way she said it, like they'd just forgotten to mention this minor detail for 28 years, was genuinely unreal. I asked why they'd never told me. My dad said they'd planned to, eventually, but the right time never came, and then it had been so long that bringing it up seemed like it would just cause pain for no reason. No reason. Finding out at 28 that your entire understanding of your family is a lie, that's definitely a reason. I asked Michelle why she was telling me now. She said she'd always wondered about me, always hoped I was happy and healthy, but the adoption agreement had been closed and she'd respected that. Then, 6 months ago, she'd been diagnosed with a genetic condition that I needed to know about for my own health. She'd tried contacting my parents privately to share the medical information, but they'd refused to respond. So she'd made the decision to come here and tell me herself. Medical information and all. The genetic condition was manageable but required monitoring. I should get tested. She'd brought all the medical records with her. I looked at my parents and asked if this was true, if Michelle had tried to contact them about a medical issue and they'd ignored her. My mum said they'd been trying to protect me, that opening this door would complicate my life unnecessarily. My dad said they'd planned to tell me about the medical condition. They just needed time to figure out how. The mental gymnastics required to justify hiding a genetic health risk from your child, because acknowledging it would reveal the adoption you'd also been hiding, was honestly breathtaking. Michelle had potentially saved my life by showing up, and my parents were framing it as her causing unnecessary drama. I asked if anyone else knew. My dad admitted that a few family members knew I was adopted, but thought it was through an agency, not a private arrangement with someone they knew. Michelle clarified that she and my mom had known each other before the affair, that my mom had actually introduced her to my dad at a work event. That detail made everything so much worse. My mom had introduced her husband to the woman he'd have an affair with, who'd then give birth to the child my mum would adopt and raise as her own. The complexity of that situation, the layers of betrayal and forgiveness and secrets, I couldn't even begin to process it. Michelle said she wasn't here to disrupt my life or claim some parental role she'd given up 28 years ago. She just wanted me to have the medical information and, if I was open to it, maybe the chance to know each other. She'd always wondered about me, what kind of person I'd become. My mom said that wasn't fair, that she couldn't just show up after letting them raise me and suddenly want a relationship. Michelle pointed out that she'd respected the closed adoption for nearly 3 decades, had only come forward because my parents had left her no choice by ignoring her attempts to share critical medical information. I asked my dad if the affair had been while he was married to my mum. He said yes, they'd been going through a rough patch. It had been a mistake he'd regretted immediately. My mum said they'd worked through it, that agreeing to adopt his biological child had been part of their healing process. She'd always known who the birth mother was. The fact that my mum had spent 28 years looking at me, knowing I was the product of her husband's affair, and never said anything, was staggering. Every birthday, every Mother's Day, every time someone said I looked like her, she'd known it was a lie and just smiled through it. I told them I needed time to process this and asked Michelle if we could meet later, just the 2 of us. She gave me her number and said she was staying in town for a few days, whenever I was ready. Then she left, and I was alone with the parents who'd lied to me my entire life. My dad tried to explain that they'd done what they thought was best, that telling me I was adopted would have just hurt me unnecessarily. I asked if he really believed that, or if he'd just been too coward to face the consequences of his affair. He didn't have an answer. My mum said she'd always loved me like her own, that biology didn't matter. I told her if biology didn't matter, then why had they hidden it? Why construct this elaborate lie if the truth wouldn't change anything? She said I didn't understand how complicated it was. I said she was right. I didn't understand how parents could lie to their child for 28 years and think that was somehow protecting them. But that wasn't even the worst part. My dad admitted that Michelle wasn't the only one who knew the truth. His sister had known from the beginning, had been against the private adoption, thought I deserved to know my origins. She'd kept the secret anyway out of loyalty to my dad. My own aunt had looked me in the eye at countless family gatherings knowing the truth and saying nothing. I asked how many other people knew. My dad said maybe 4 or 5 family members, all sworn to secrecy. So family dinners where I'd felt so connected, so part of this unit, there had been people sitting around the table knowing my entire identity was based on a lie. The betrayal wasn't just from my parents, it was from everyone who participated in maintaining the fiction. I met Michelle for coffee 3 days later. She showed me photos from when she was pregnant, told me about the decision to give me up, how hard it had been, but how sure she'd been that it was right. She'd gone on to have 2 other children, my half-siblings, who knew about me and wanted to meet me if I was interested. More family I didn't know existed, more relationships built on my ignorance. I asked why she'd agreed to a closed adoption if she and my parents knew each other. She said it had seemed easier at the time, cleaner, less complicated. Then she'd watched from a distance as I grew up, my mum posting photos on social media, mutual friends sharing updates. She'd known everything about my life while staying invisible. The medical condition she'd mentioned was serious but treatable. I got tested and I have it. I'm starting treatment next month. If Michelle hadn't shown up, I might not have known until it caused real damage. My parents had literally risked my health to maintain their lie. Michelle wants a relationship, wants me to meet my half-siblings, be part of her life, make up for the years we lost. I don't know if I want that. She's not my mum, despite biology. But my mum lied to me for 28 years, so maybe she's not really my mum either. I don't know what family means anymore. My parents keep trying to explain, to justify, to make me understand why they did what they did. I've stopped listening. The why doesn't matter as much as the fact that they did it, that they chose deception over honesty every single day for my entire life. I'm in therapy now, trying to figure out who I am when everything I thought I knew was wrong. My therapist says it's normal to feel untethered, that identity crises from late discovered adoption are common. Doesn't make it easier. Discovering your true parentage is earth-shattering, but money has a way of revealing family secrets too, and this next person's college fund mystery exposed a truth no one saw coming. My cousin Emma posted in our family group chat last week with one of those heartfelt thank you messages. She'd just graduated from college completely debt-free, and she wanted to thank the generous anonymous donor who'd paid her tuition for all 4 years. The message was sweet, talking about how grateful she was, how this gift had changed her life, how she wished she could thank them personally. Everyone in the chat started congratulating her. My mom sent hearts. My dad wrote something about how proud he was. Other aunts and uncles chimed in with celebration emojis and congratulations. But nobody claimed to be the donor. Nobody said, "You're welcome," or "It was my pleasure," or gave any indication they were the mysterious benefactor. I found that weird. Our family isn't huge, maybe 20 people in that group chat, and we're generally pretty open about stuff like this. If someone had dropped probably $100,000 on Emma's education over 4 years, why stay anonymous? Why not take credit for that kind of generosity? I messaged Emma privately and asked her directly who'd paid for school. She said she genuinely didn't know. Every semester for 4 years, her tuition bill would be paid in full by wire transfer from something called Lighthouse Educational LLC. She'd tried to trace it but couldn't find any information beyond the company name. Her parents had asked around the family when it first happened, but nobody claimed responsibility, so they just accepted the mysterious gift. Something about that didn't sit right with me. I work in finance, so I have access to business registry databases, and I'm comfortable digging through financial records. I looked up Lighthouse Educational LLC. It was registered in our state 5 years ago, right before Emma started college. The registered agent was my Uncle Brian, my dad's younger brother. Uncle Brian lives in a tiny apartment and drives a 15-year-old car. He's not poor exactly, but he's definitely not casually funding someone's entire college education. I'd been to his place, seen how he lives. There was no way he had that kind of money lying around. I called him and asked about the LLC. He got immediately defensive, asking why I was looking into his business affairs. I told him I was just curious about Emma's donor and came across his name. He said he couldn't talk about it and hung up, which just made me more suspicious. I have a friend who works at a bank, and I asked her if there was any way to trace where the money in that LLC account came from without breaking any laws. She said if I had the LLC's tax ID number, which I did from the business registry, she might be able to see if there were any public records of large transactions. Nothing detailed, but maybe a general trail. Turns out there were records. The LLC account received regular large deposits from my Uncle Brian's personal account, which matched the timing of Emma's tuition payments. But my uncle's account showed those same amounts being deposited from another account just days before each transfer. That account belonged to my Aunt Linda, my mum's sister. Aunt Linda is married to a lawyer and lives in a nice house in the suburbs. She definitely has money, but why would she be funneling it through my Uncle Brian's account to pay for Emma's college? Why not just pay it directly? Why the LLC and the mysterious anonymous donor routine? I sat with this information for a couple days, trying to figure out an innocent explanation. Maybe they were co-funding it and wanted it to be a joint gift, but that didn't explain the secrecy or the weird money trail. Maybe there was some tax advantage to structuring it this way, but I'm in finance and I couldn't think of any legitimate reason for this setup. Then I remembered something from a family barbecue about 2 years ago. I'd walked into my uncle's kitchen to grab a drink and found him and Aunt Linda standing very close together, and they jumped apart when I came in. At the time I'd thought nothing of it, but now it was sitting differently in my memory. I started thinking about other times I'd seen them together at family events, how they'd always volunteer to do dish duty together, how they'd disappear at the same time during parties, how my uncle had been at my aunt's house fixing her sink when her husband was out of town. Individually, all innocent. Together, a pattern. I confronted my uncle first, showed up at his apartment and laid out what I'd found. The LLC, the money trail, the deposits from Aunt Linda. I asked him what was going on. He tried to deny it at first, said it was complicated financial planning I wouldn't understand. I told him I literally work in finance and this wasn't normal financial planning. He broke down pretty quickly, admitted he and Aunt Linda had been having an affair for 6 years. It had started at a family reunion, continued in secret, and they both felt massively guilty about it. When Emma started college, they decided to do something good with the relationship, to make something positive come from their betrayal. They'd agreed to fund her education together as a way to assuage their guilt. The twisted logic of that was almost impressive. They were betraying their families, so they'd pay for their niece's college to feel better about it. Like tuition payments could somehow offset an affair. I asked if anyone else knew. He said no, they'd been extremely careful. The LLC was specifically set up to hide the money trail from their spouses, who might ask questions about large withdrawals. This way it looked like business expenses from my uncle's side business, which he actually did have. I went to Aunt Linda next. She tried to lie at first, said she was just helping Brian with a business investment. I told her I knew about the affair, that Brian had already admitted it. She started crying, begging me not to tell anyone, saying it would destroy both families. I asked her how she thought it would affect Emma to know her college was paid for by 2 people betraying her parents. She said Emma never had to know, that the anonymous donor thing could stay anonymous. I pointed out I already knew, so it wasn't anonymous anymore. She tried to bargain with me, said she'd give me money to keep quiet, offered to pay off my student loans, actually tried to bribe me into silence about an affair I'd discovered while investigating her bribe to my cousin. The layers of deception were genuinely dizzying. I told them both they had a week to come clean to their families, or I would. My uncle begged for more time. Aunt Linda said I was being cruel, that I was going to destroy multiple marriages and relationships over something that didn't concern me. I said they'd destroyed their own marriages, I just found the evidence. They didn't tell anyone. The week passed and both of them were clearly hoping I'd just let it go, so I posted everything in the family group chat, screenshots of the business registry showing my uncle as the registered agent, bank statements showing the money trail from Aunt Linda to Uncle Brian to the LLC, and a summary of what I'd discovered and what they'd both admitted. The family group chat exploded. Emma's dad called my uncle immediately, shouting loud enough that I could hear it through my uncle's phone when he called me begging me to fix this. Aunt Linda's husband showed up at her house demanding answers. My mum called me crying, asking if I was sure, if there was any chance I was wrong. Emma messaged me privately, completely devastated. She'd been so proud of graduating debt-free, so grateful for the mysterious donor, and now she was finding out her education was funded by two people who'd been betraying her parents for years. She asked if I could take it back, if there was any way to undo what I'd revealed. But that wasn't even the worst part. Turns out my uncle and Aunt Linda had been using family events to cover their affair for 6 years. Every holiday, every birthday party, every casual family gathering where they'd volunteered to help set up or clean up, they'd been stealing time together while their spouses and kids were in the next room. The audacity of maintaining an affair in the middle of family functions was staggering. Both marriages are ending in divorce. My uncle's wife threw him out the same night. Aunt Linda's husband filed papers the next day. Emma's parents are barely speaking to their siblings. Extended family members are taking sides, some blaming me for exposing it, others saying I did the right thing. Emma set up a GoFundMe to pay back the tuition money. She doesn't want anything to do with their guilt payments. The fund has raised about $30,000 so far from family members who feel bad about the situation, but it's nowhere near the full amount of her tuition. She's looking into payment plans with the college to retroactively take on the debt herself. I've gotten dozens of messages from family members, half calling me a hero for exposing the affair, half calling me a villain for destroying the family. My uncle's ex-wife thanked me for finally giving her proof of something she'd suspected. Aunt Linda's husband won't speak to anyone in the family. Says we're all complicit for not noticing. I was having one of those nights where nothing looked good on any streaming service. You know the type, where you scroll for 20 minutes just to end up rewatching something you've seen 100 times. I'd just gotten home from work, my partner was supposedly pulling another late shift at the office, and I was ready to zone out with whatever mindless content I could find. That's when I stumbled across this new dating show I'd never heard of before. The thumbnail looked dramatic enough, so I figured why not. I clicked play and settled into the couch with my takeout. The first few minutes were the usual reality TV nonsense, dramatic music and contestants introducing themselves with their carefully rehearsed sob stories about why they deserve love. I was half paying attention, mostly just scrolling through my phone, when I heard a laugh that made my entire body go cold. I looked up at the screen and there he was, my partner of 3 years, sitting on a velvet couch in what looked like some tropical villa, laughing and touching the arm of a woman in a cocktail dress. I actually said "what the hell" out loud to my empty apartment. I rewound the footage just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Nope, that was definitely him. Same dimple on his left cheek, same stupid expensive watch I'd helped him pick out for his birthday last year. Same everything. He was introducing himself to the camera, talking about how he was ready to find real love and settle down with the right person. The woman next to him giggled and asked if he was always this charming. He gave her the same smile he'd given me on our first date. My hands were shaking as I paused the show and checked the description. It said the season was filmed recently and was being released as episodes dropped. I went to the show's social media pages, looking for any information about filming dates. Their Instagram had behind-the-scenes photos tagged from 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago. I pulled up my calendar just to confirm what I already knew. 6 weeks ago, we were together. 6 weeks ago, he'd told me he loved me. 6 weeks ago, we'd been planning a vacation for next month. I took screenshots of everything. Him on the couch, him on what looked like a romantic beach date with a different contestant, him in the confession booth talking about his connection with someone named Amber. I screenshot the show description, the Instagram posts with dates, everything I could find. Then I kept watching because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Over the next hour, I watched my partner flirt with multiple women, go on elaborate dates, and talk extensively about how single and ready to mingle he was. At one point, he literally said he'd been single for over a year and was tired of the dating scene. We'd been together for 3 years. The math wasn't mathing, as they say. When he finally came home that night around 11, I was still sitting on the couch. He walked in cheerful as ever, asking what I was up to. I just turned the TV toward him. His face went through about 5 different expressions in 3 seconds: confusion, recognition, panic, and then this forced casual smile like he could somehow play this off. He immediately started talking. No, it wasn't what it looked like. Yes, that was him. But I had to understand they filmed that show over a year ago and just now released it. The production company must have gotten the dates wrong on their posts. It was all a misunderstanding. He'd actually forgotten he'd even been on the show because it was so long ago and before we met. He loves me. He'd never do that to me. I had to believe him. I let him finish his whole speech. Then I asked him to explain the watch, the one I gave him 8 months ago, the one clearly visible on his wrist in multiple shots. He tried to claim it was a different watch that just looked similar, but his voice was already cracking. I told him I had screenshots and I'd already looked into it, but honestly I just wanted to hear what he'd say. He switched tactics, saying, "Okay, fine. Maybe the dates were more recent than he remembered." But nothing actually happened on the show. It was just for fun, basically a free vacation, and he came home to me, didn't he? That's when it really hit me. Not the betrayal itself, but the fact that he genuinely thought this explanation would work. Like I was supposed to just accept that my partner went on a dating show, romanced multiple women on camera, and it was totally fine because it was just for fun. And technically he came back. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just told him I needed him to be honest with me about the filming dates. He kept insisting it was older footage, that the show must have messed up the timeline for drama. So I told him I'd called the production company earlier that evening, pretending to be a journalist writing a piece about reality dating shows. They'd been very helpful. Even gave me quotes about their rapid production to release timeline. Filming wrapped 6 weeks ago. The season was being released in real time as a test for their new quick turnaround model. His face went completely white. He started stammering about how I was checking up on him, how that was a violation of trust, how I should have just talked to him first before going behind his back to investigate. The audacity was genuinely impressive. This man had been on national television declaring himself single, and I'd violated his trust by making a phone call. I asked him point blank if he'd been seeing anyone else, thinking maybe there was more I didn't know about. He swore up and down that nothing physical happened with any of the contestants. They were all just playing it up for cameras. And he never intended for me to find out because it didn't mean anything. Which, really makes you feel special. That's when I told him I was done. Not asking for an explanation, not interested in couples therapy, just done. He tried to argue, saying I was overreacting, that we could work through this, that everyone makes mistakes. I reminded him this wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. This was a series of calculated decisions that included applying to be on a dating show, going through what I'm sure was an extensive interview process, flying to whatever tropical location they filmed at, and spending weeks actively pursuing other women on camera. He got angry then, saying, fine, if I wanted to throw away 3 years over nothing, that was my problem. He'd sleep on the couch and we'd talk about this rationally in the morning when I'd calm down. I told him not to bother because I wouldn't be here in the morning. I waited until he left for work the next day. Then I packed everything that mattered to me. Clothes, documents, the few pieces of furniture I brought into the relationship. I loaded it all into my car in 3 trips. Then I printed out the most damning screenshots, the ones where he was clearly wearing the watch I'd given him while canoodling with contestants, and I left them spread across the kitchen counter where he'd definitely see them. I didn't leave a note. The screenshot said everything that needed to be said. I blocked his number, blocked him on every social media platform, and stayed with my sister for a few days while I figured out my next move. Within hours, his family started calling. First his mum, very sweet, asking if we could talk about whatever happened because her son was devastated. Then his sister, much less sweet, demanding to know why I'd blindsided her brother and abandoned him without even trying to work things out. I didn't answer any of them. I did, however, send his mother a link to the show with a timestamp of her son's most romantic beach date. She stopped calling. His sister did not. She left me a voicemail calling me every name in the book, saying I was cruel and heartless for humiliating him like this, and that he'd made one mistake, and I was destroying him over it. One mistake. The man had been on a reality dating show for weeks. That's not one mistake. That's a whole season of mistakes. Literally. My friends have been incredibly supportive, especially after I showed them the footage. A few of them admitted they'd seen ads for the show but didn't watch it, and now they felt terrible for not giving me a heads up. I told them it wasn't their job to monitor reality TV for my partner's face, but I appreciated the sentiment. The weirdest part is he's apparently telling people I left him out of nowhere with no explanation. His friends have been sliding into my DMs asking what happened, saying he's really broken up about it. I've just been sending them the link to the show and letting them draw their own conclusions. Most have gone silent after that. A few have apologized on his behalf, which is nice, I guess, but doesn't really change anything. I found out from a mutual friend that he's claiming the show edited him to look worse than he was, and that I'm being vindictive by not letting him explain. Explain what exactly? I'm not sure. The footage speaks for itself. He went on a dating show while we were together. There's no director's cut that makes that okay. The thing that really gets me is how easy it would have been for me to never find out. If I'd picked a different show that night, or if I'd been too tired to pay attention, I might have stayed with him indefinitely. He certainly wasn't planning to tell me, and that's somehow worse than the betrayal itself, knowing he was fully prepared to just never mention it and hope I didn't stumble across his season premiere. I'm doing okay now. Better than okay, actually. I got my own apartment, something small but entirely mine. I've been focusing on work, hanging out with friends, basically just rebuilding my life without someone who thought reality TV fame was worth risking our relationship. Sometimes I wonder if he actually won the show. I never finished watching the season. Part of me is curious, but a bigger part of me doesn't want to give him the viewing numbers. Let him have his 15 minutes of fame. I'll take the peace of mind that comes from knowing exactly who someone is before wasting any more time on them. His family finally stopped calling about 2 weeks ago. I'm assuming they watched the show. I heard through the grapevine that his mum was not pleased, which gives me a tiny bit of satisfaction I'm not entirely proud of. His sister apparently told him he was an idiot, which I deeply appreciate, even though we'll probably never speak again. The screenshots are still on my phone. I haven't deleted them, not because I need the reminder, but because sometimes I genuinely can't believe it happened. 3 years together and he risked it all for a chance to be on TV, making out with strangers in a villa. The risk to reward ratio there is honestly baffling. I've started dating again, casually. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and getting to know people. And yes, I do Google them first now to make sure they're not currently filming any reality television shows. Once bitten, twice shy and all that. But if you think a dating show betrayal is bad, wait until you hear what one Redditor discovered when their brother's best friend finally broke his silence at a family dinner. Jake had been part of our family for as long as I could remember. He and my brother met in middle school and became inseparable. The kind of friends who showed up to every holiday dinner, every birthday party, every random Tuesday night just because. By the time I was old enough to really pay attention, Jake was already a fixture. My parents treated him like a second son. My mum always made sure to include him in family photos. Looking back now, that detail makes my skin crawl. It was my parents' 35th wedding anniversary, and we'd planned this whole dinner at their favorite restaurant, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list that requires a second mortgage. My brother and I had split the cost, Jake had tagged along like always, and everything was going exactly how these things usually go. My dad told the same stories he tells at every gathering. My mom laughed at the same spots, and we all pretended the food justified the price tag. Jake had been drinking more than usual, but nobody thought much of it. He was always the fun drunk, the guy who got louder and told worse jokes as the night went on. After dessert, while my parents were saying goodbye to some friends they'd run into, Jake grabbed my arm and asked if we could talk outside for a minute. I figured he wanted to complain about his job or ask advice about some girl he was seeing. Normal best friend sibling stuff. We got out to the parking lot and he was pacing, running his hands through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. I asked if he was okay and he just laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Then he said he needed to tell me something, that he'd been carrying it for too long and it was eating him alive. I made some joke about him joining a cult or something, trying to lighten whatever mood this was. That's when he told me he'd been in love with my mum since he was 17. Just said it straight out, like he was commenting on the weather. I actually laughed because what else do you do when your brother's best friend says something that insane? But he wasn't laughing. He looked dead serious, and that's when my stomach started to sink. Then he said they'd had an affair when I was 10 years old. He said it lasted 2 years. He said he thinks about it all the time and he can't keep pretending it never happened. I told him to stop talking, that he was drunk and saying things he'd regret. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos of old letters, handwritten notes from my mum talking about meeting up, about keeping things secret, about how much she cared about him. The dates were clearly visible. I recognized my mum's handwriting immediately. The way she loops her L's, the little hearts she draws instead of dots over her eyes. I felt like I was going to throw up right there in the parking lot. This man had been sitting at our dinner table for 15 years, eating my mum's cooking, accepting Christmas gifts from my dad, all while carrying this secret. The sheer audacity of showing up to their anniversary dinner after sleeping with my mum when he was barely legal was genuinely staggering. I asked him why he was telling me this now, what he possibly thought would come from this confession. He said he needed someone to know, that the guilt was destroying him, and he thought I'd understand because we'd always gotten along. Like our casual friendly relationship somehow made me the appropriate person to dump this nuclear bomb on. I left him in the parking lot and went back inside in a daze. My parents were getting ready to leave, talking about what a nice night it had been. My brother was checking his phone, completely oblivious. I felt like I was watching everything through a fog, like none of it was real. I waited 2 days before I confronted my mum. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just kept replaying Jake's words and looking at those letter photos I'd screenshotted before I could stop myself. Finally, I went to her house when I knew my dad would be at work. I showed her the screenshots and asked her point blank if it was true. She went completely pale. For a solid minute, she just stared at the phone screen, and I could see her trying to figure out how to spin this, how to explain it away. Then she just crumbled, started crying, saying she was so sorry, that it was the biggest mistake of her life, that she'd ended it years ago and had been trying to forget it ever happened. I asked her how it even started. She said Jake had confessed feelings for her when he was 17, that she'd tried to shut it down, but he was persistent and she was going through a rough patch with my dad, and it just happened. It just happened. Like an affair with your son's teenage best friend is something that accidentally occurs, like a fender bender or spilling coffee. She begged me not to tell my dad, said it would destroy him, that it was ancient history, and bringing it up now would only cause pain for no reason. She actually used the phrase, "what he doesn't know won't hurt him," which is rich considering it clearly hurt me, and I'd only known for 2 days. I told her I needed time to process and left. I drove around for hours, just trying to wrap my head around the fact that my entire childhood had this massive lie sitting underneath it. Every family dinner with Jake, every time my mom welcomed him into our home, my dad had no idea what had happened. The betrayal wasn't just the affair itself, it was the years of deception, the casual way they'd both acted like nothing had happened. I decided to tell my brother first. He was my closest family member after my parents, and I thought we'd figure out together how to handle this. I thought he'd be as horrified as I was. That was a miscalculation. I met him at his apartment and explained everything. Showed him the screenshots, told him about Jake's confession, about Mom's admission. I expected shock, anger, maybe denial. Instead, he got very quiet. And then he asked why I couldn't just leave it alone. I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. I asked him to repeat that and he did, slower this time, like I was the one not understanding. He said it happened 15 years ago, that Mom clearly regretted it, and dragging it all up now would only destroy our family for no reason. I pointed out that our family was already destroyed. We just didn't know it yet. That's when he snapped, started yelling about how I always had to make everything dramatic, how I couldn't just let things be, how I was going to ruin our parents' marriage over something that didn't even involve me. He said I was being selfish, that I should think about Dad's happiness instead of my need to be right. The mental gymnastics required to blame me for this were honestly Olympic level. I wasn't the one who had the affair. I wasn't the one who confessed it at an anniversary dinner. I was just the person who now had to carry this information, and apparently that made me the villain. But that wasn't even the worst part. My brother called Jake immediately after I left, warning him that I knew and was planning to tell Dad. Jake panicked and called my mum. My mum panicked and confessed everything to my dad before I even had a chance to figure out what to do. My dad called me at 11 at night, completely broken, asked me if I'd known, how long I'd known, why I hadn't told him immediately. I tried to explain that I'd only found out a few days ago and was trying to process it, but he just kept asking why I'd kept it from him. Like the few days I'd sat with this information were somehow equivalent to my mum's 15 years of lies. My parents are getting divorced. Dad moved out last week and isn't speaking to Mum at all. They're selling the house. 35 years of marriage, gone. My brother isn't speaking to me. He's told extended family that I destroyed our parents' marriage by digging up old history that should have stayed buried. Some of them believe him. I've gotten texts from aunts and uncles asking why I couldn't just let the past be the past, telling me that families keep secrets for a reason. And Jake. Jake sent me an email 3 days ago apologizing for putting me in this position. Said he'd been carrying the guilt for so long that he just had to get it off his chest, and he was sorry I got caught in the fallout. He actually wrote that he hoped we could still be friends someday, like we just had a minor disagreement over where to get lunch. The level of delusion required to think we'd ever be friends after this was genuinely fascinating. This man imploded my entire family because he couldn't handle his own guilt, and he thought a casual apology email would smooth things over. I'm staying with a friend right now because being around any of my family feels impossible. My dad keeps calling wanting to rehash details I don't have. My mum sent flowers with a card asking for forgiveness. My brother sent one text saying I should be ashamed of myself for destroying everyone's lives. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Seriously, I need to know I'm not alone in this madness. Now back to the wreckage. The thing that keeps me up at night is that I'm somehow the villain in this story, not Jake, who started an affair with his best friend's mum when he was 17 and she was in her 40s. Not my mum, who betrayed my dad and her family for 2 years. Not my brother, who values keeping up appearances over actual honesty. Me. Because I didn't enthusiastically participate in covering up a 15-year-old secret that I'd only known about for a few days. I've been replaying every family memory with Jake in it, and they're all tainted now. Every holiday, every dinner, every casual conversation. Was my mom thinking about the affair? Was Jake? How did they look my dad in the eye knowing what they'd done? My dad asked me if I thought he'd been a bad husband, if that's why it happened. That conversation destroyed me. I had to tell my father that his wife's affair had nothing to do with him and everything to do with her choices, but I could see in his eyes he didn't believe me. He's questioning their entire marriage now, wondering what else he missed, what other secrets are waiting to surface. I looked up the legal definition of grooming because Jake was 17 when it started, technically a minor depending on the state. My mum was 42. The power dynamic there is horrifying when you really think about it, but everyone's so focused on keeping the secret that nobody wants to address how inappropriate the entire situation was from the start. Jake's been texting my brother, apparently. They're still friends. My brother told me this like it was supposed to make me feel guilty for causing drama. His best friend had an affair with our mom, and he's more concerned about maintaining that friendship than supporting our dad. The priority system there is genuinely broken. I've started therapy because processing this alone was making me feel insane. My therapist keeps using the phrase misplaced blame, talking about how families often scapegoat the person who reveals dysfunction rather than addressing the actual dysfunction. It's validating but doesn't make family dinners any less awkward. Not that we're having those anymore. The divorce is